Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by King Newbie, Matt Freeman.
We are here to report that everything is fine, and all the reports that you've been hearing out there have been grossly exaggerated, and don't
forget, Tom, that they're safe.
Yes, that everything will return to normal. So, no, you know what? They're lying to you. They're forcing me to say these lines. Don't believe the lies. Don't believe after that.
This week on the podcast, The Stand continues with chapter 21 through 28, and everything is fine. Things get much, much worse for the people of the world as Captain Trips takes its hold. Larry and Frannie meet a couple of other survivors, and a dude comes walking into our story. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Oh, well, the dude coming into the story was very fun. I also greatly enjoyed the chapter where we sort of took the floating point of view and saw a bunch of horrible shit happening.
Yeah.
One thing that I think I'm going to repeat like 6 times this week is a thing that I've really been enjoying is King's willingness to sit with this part of the story. I feel like a lot of sort of pandemic stories or zombie stories or whatever it is where there's a big disaster and then there's no people left, they tend to just rush to the part where there's no people left. Mm-hmm. And the story is really taking its time. It's really taking its time with the loss and grief and confusion and desolation of the characters. And I don't know. I'm just really enjoying this part of the story because it seems like a part that we rarely get.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like I said, this is my favorite book of this book. Not that the other ones aren't great also, but I love that we just live in this forever. I mean, we're still like, I believe it says, we're supposed to go all the way to July 2nd, I believe, is what the thing at the very beginning of book 1 says. Like, I don't know if we said this, but there's some calendar dates at the very beginning. I don't know how they handled that on the audiobook, but sorry, I'm killing time. Yeah. So what it says is book 1 is called Captain Trips, and it says June 16th through July 4th, 1990. So we're supposed to be going all the way to July 4th in this one particular book. We're on the 24th of June at the moment, which is like a week after this whole thing. It's going remarkably fast, but at the same time, he's taking his time with it, which I agree. It's great.
Yeah, I don't remember that being in the audiobook. I might have just missed it.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, no, I'm man, I can't tell you how much I'm loving this book. This is one of these things where I've always loved this story as just a story, and getting to spend the time with it and getting to see the things that King is doing and the comparisons between characters he's making here that I think, to me are so transparent and obvious when you really look at it that they just feel 100% intentional. It's been an absolute pleasure. I am loving this book so much, more so than I ever had. And that's exactly what I was hoping would happen here. So it's been a great time. I love my reading right now.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not the only person in the world who noticed the similarities between the characters.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah, that'll be fun. We'll get there.
Yeah, we will. Before we do that, though, we just have a couple quick announcements. Just want to re-announce the thing we announced last week, which is our Do the King Thing 2 contest, our short story fiction writing contest that we announced last week. We've already got over like half a dozen entries already, which is wonderful. Thank you so much to the people who have already sat down and done the King thing and submitted your story. Please continue submitting those stories. You've got I think they've got 3 more weeks, right, Matt? We said a month for this thing.
We did. We said 4 weeks total.
Yeah. So once again, the link to that contest will be in the show notes of this very episode. So find out all the information there and get those stories submitted. I'm so excited. I've already read a couple of the stories been submitted, and they're fun, Matt. It's gonna be. I love this contest so much. So please participate. It's gonna be really, really fun.
Yeah, and remember, the voting is open to all patrons. So
yeah, definitely. Speaking of Patreon, I think we wanted to do something that I don't think we've ever talked about on the podcast before, right?
Yeah, it's a little. It might seem a little in the weeds, but basically, Patreon does not actually make it that straightforward to access the audio bonus content once you are a patron.
That's true.
What's funny is I've had we've had our Patreon for years, but it actually took me a surprisingly long time to figure out how to access the Patreon audio content. Mm-hmm. And so if you are a patron at the correct level, at the level that qualifies for the bonus content, then what you want to do to get to your content is basically, I probably should have looked this up beforehand to get it right. So you go, if you're on your phone, you go to the page of the Doof Media, for example, and then you go to like the overview tab on the Doof Media page, and then it should say somewhere on the overview tab, it should say get audio RSS link. There's an equivalent thing on the website where you go to the landing page and you look for, get audio RSS link, and then you paste that into your podcatcher. And almost every podcatcher that I know of has a place for you to paste that link in. Yeah. It'll just be like, plus symbol. Then it's like, are you adding an RSS link or something like that? And then you add the RSS link into your podcatcher, and then your podcatcher is just like, bam, added that podcast. And it's there just like any other podcast. You'll see it as like the Doof bonus content podcast, basically. Mm-hmm. And it'll be really obvious. And then, and then you're done. Like it's very, once you've done it, you never have to think about it again. And it's actually not that easy to do, but Patreon also doesn't make it necessarily obvious for you. So
yeah, that's I think the best way to do it, because if you listen to your podcast on your phone, like via that particular podcatcher, this will just be a thing that will automatically push to it every time, and it's great. Mm-hmm. And no matter what, the cool thing is, no matter what level you are on Patreon, because we have stuff that's available for everyone. Those are our Doof After Darks, and then we have stuff available for certain tiers only. And Patreon knows what tier you're at and will only push the audio files to whatever tier you're currently at. So even if you change tiers, even if you go up and down, it will know that, and it will push any new thing that you're eligible for automatically. There is another way of doing it, Matt. It's if you download the Patreon app, there is in the Patreon app, there is on the main feed, there's a thing that says posts for all the things you subscribe to. And then there's a tab that says audio, and it will show all the audio podcast or all the audio files from anyone that you're supporting on Patreon on that list. I don't like doing it that way because I don't typically listen to podcasts via Patreon. It's just not the thing I do, but that is an option available to you if you want. And if you like don't have a podcatcher or typically listen another way, that is an option. It's not the best. Like, I love Patreon. They've been so good to us. I'm so thankful, but there's some things that they just don't do a very good job explaining at all. And this is one of them. The impetus of this, for those that don't know, is, we had a large influx of new listeners over the past week or so, which means we've had some new Patreons, and they've been asking, you talk about other levels of the tower, how I get that. Mm-hmm. And as we were looking through it, the simplest way to explain that to people, we were like, this is confusing, actually. People probably don't know how to do it. So hopefully that clears things up. I hope so.
Yeah, right. And I think that's all we got to say for now. I think people will sort it out. But
yeah, definitely. All right, let's get into our chapters for the week. We will begin with chapter 21. It's a Stu chapter. It's our only Stu chapter of the week, actually. We're just going to hang out with him a little bit here at the beginning, and then say goodbye for the week.
Yeah, you're right. It's a brief little taste of Stu.
It is. So our good old pal Stu has left behind Atlanta and the Atlanta Plague Center, which, as we discussed last week, was breached due to some accidental and careless nursing. And so we see since then Stu has been moved up to Vermont, which is, conveniently close to some of our other characters, right? There we go.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's funny because I kind of figured that it was sort of intentional that our characters were more distributed. Because I figured there was going to be more of a lengthy, like Tolkien-esque journey by road as they all join together, with everyone starting far apart and then converging. But yeah, it seems like we might not be going that way. We're just going to start out with everyone relatively close together, and I imagine there will still be a trip by road section, but it won't be like across the entire U.S.
Yeah, don't forget our good pal Nick is way down there. He's not close to the Northeast at all.
That's true. Oh, good point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess technically New York City and Vermont are not that close. I mean, relatively close together, but not not that close together either. But no, I think you're right. I mean, I think it's we're moving him closer to the Frannie Larry um, uh, field of influence. I think it would be fair to say.
Yeah, makes sense.
So we see here in this chapter that Stu is afraid, actually. He's really afraid. And I think this chapter really, it's kind of the perfect introductory chapter for our week's reading, because I think this does a lot to set up a lot of the major motifs of this week's reading. You know, this idea of collapse, that Stu has been, you know, quickly carted off to this new place he's in Vermont. He notices that they're still doing tests on him, but they're much more lackluster about it. It seems like people are starting to give up and starting to fall apart, and that is, you know, that is kind of the motif that's going to carry us through every single one of these chapters. And then the other half of that is the government's last ditch efforts to stop the spread, not of Tubnik, but of course of information. And that's one of the things that Stu is most scared about, is that he's become expendable, because he's no longer like going to be clearly the secret cure weapon that cures everyone. He's just an expendable piece, and he's terrified of that. And we'll see how much the government is going to treat people as expendable throughout this week.
Yeah, at the beginning of the week's reading, you're like, don't worry too much about that, Stu. You'll be fine. But then by the end, you're like, oh yeah, they totally might just kill him because he knows too much.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, and it is something that we saw a little bit of last week, but I think this week it takes center stage. The idea that the military is killing, you know, people wantonly. You know, why? Is it to contain the virus? No, it's to contain the information, right? And that's like, I found that to be particularly infuriating this week.
Yeah.
Like, I was more mad about what the military was doing than I was, you know, sad about the virus killing everyone. It was just, there's something viscerally upsetting and awful about like piling on to the already existing pointless stupidity with information suppression on top of the disaster.
Yeah. Ineffectual information suppression too. I mean, we're going to talk about this a lot this week, but the idea that what they're not actually doing is trying to stop the spread of information either, because they know that's going to happen. Despite what they do, what they're trying to do is hold on to the center as long as they can, right? They're trying to hold on to their grip on power and control for as long as they possibly can, for no greater purpose other than that we're in charge and we want to remain in charge. Like there's no loyal, I'm sure they'll tell themselves this, but there's no like loyal, heroic thing behind this is, we have to hold the center as long as we can because it will keep the most amount of people safe. No, because you're killing thousands and thousands of people wantonly. So yeah, it's absolutely horrifying. You're right.
Yeah, when we get to the poem later, we should talk about what the center even is in their view, right?
I think we will. Yeah. I loved, we talked about him being expendable. I just love the way Stu breaks things down for us, just matter of factly. He says, if they were just going through the motions now, then he had become expendable. Being under detention was bad. Being under detention and being expendable, that was very bad.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's a sort of like folksy wisdom that we get from Stu, which is fun.
It's delightful. Yeah.
But yeah, the overall sense we're starting to get is, you know, the villain so far in the story has actually been the military, and that's not something that I knew. I mean, it's interesting. I've said before, I kind of knew a lot about this book going into it, just from pop culture. But one thing I did not know was how badly the military comes off.
Yeah, no, really, really bad. We're about to move into a chapter where they look through the eyes of Starkey. They look specifically monstrous, but yeah, it is. I mean, I think it goes to show you just, this is, you know, a lot of the comments and things that we've gotten from our readers about the difference between setting this book in 1990 and the difference between setting it in 1980 is this is just a remarkably 70s story in its attitude towards the United States military and the United States government, like generally. Like this was a time in our country similar to a time we perhaps have right now, where like anti-American, anti-government thoughts were pretty rampant in our country, right? Like people were not happy with the government. They were not happy with the military. They were not happy. And the 80s, meanwhile, is a time of like, you know, rampant patriotism, actually. Like things turn around rather quickly on that front. So the book being sent in 1990 doesn't quite match up with that perfectly. But yeah, no, this is a very Stephen King in the 60s and 70s is really, really mad at the U.S. government type of story for sure.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. So our chapter ends with Stu looking out of the window in his room, and we see sunset, the sunset of humanity, you could say. The sun was touching the horizon now, tinting it to gold that would turn to red and fade to orange soon. And the last lines of the chapter are, "The nights were the worst."
It's great.
So great symbolism there. I love it.
Yeah.
It's so funny because I've talked this before, but I'll reiterate here. I don't actually like plan when I'm breaking the chapters up for the readings. I don't actually like do the work of going through and actually saying this would be a great chapter to start a section on. This would be a great chapter to end a section on. Honestly, that would take so much time and would be really messy actually, that I just don't do it. I just go off page number. But I am kind of constantly thrilled about how this stuff works, where this chapter 21 to me feels like the perfect introduction for everything we're going to be talking about this week. It's a quick, short little chapter with Stu just establishing where he is and then just laying the groundwork for everything that we're going to do for the rest of the week. And I think, that's, again, just a testament to King as a writer. He just, you could pick and choose and carve and slice any piece of this book, and I think you would find a perfect setup and payoff within that little slice.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like that's one thing we've noticed about King and other writers who I think of as just being great writers is their tendency to weave all of their themes very, deftly and subtly yet thoroughly throughout everything, so that any given chapter you're like, oh, this is a great chapter because it kind of really emphasizes this theme, and it's like, well, actually they all do.
Yeah.
But you notice it more when it's there's sort of a structure imposed on it like we're doing here.
Yep. All right, so we move on to chapter 22, Starkey. We head back to our pill-popping, wonderful, quality human being that is General Starkey, who has just been told at the beginning of the chapter by the President of the United States himself that he has been relieved of his command. So all you have to do to get fired in the military is to be in charge of a station that inadvertently releases a virus that kills all of humanity. So, there is a line.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. I'm grateful. Like I really feel like this is a just and sufficient punishment for the man who killed the human race. I hope
he's fired. Yeah,
I hope he doesn't feel too sad about losing his job. No. He'll bounce back though.
Yeah, he'll be fine. So like you were kind of talking about a couple of minutes ago, the first thing that they do in this chapter itself is kind of just lay the groundwork for making us really hate the United States government, at least King's version of the United States government that takes place in this book. Because one of the first things we learn is that they injected Captain Trips into Stu to see what would happen to him without his consent, right? They just, I think they said specifically that he thought it was just like a sedative. And it was the blue virus. They put it in him just to see, hey, what's going to happen here? And we learned that his body just immediately killed the thing like it was nothing. But that's pretty fucked up, right?
I mean, yeah, like for sure. Like that's, but by the end of this chapter, that sort of, by the end of this week's reading, I should say, that sort of behavior will seem completely normal and typical. But at this point in the story, we're like, yeah, wow, they're just completely psychopaths, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. And the second thing we learn here at the beginning of this chapter is something that touches on what you were asking about last week, which was just like, I wonder if this thing is getting international. I wonder if it's going to just be one of those apocalyptic stories where the United States is wiped out or these continents are wiped out, but we wonder about the rest of the world. And we see here that we don't have to worry about that, Matt, because we learn that Starkey has arranged a contingency plan in order to deflect knowledge that the virus was developed by the U.S. government in the United States. Starkey has planned for the virus to be released by agents in countries all around the world. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to give a keyword, and agents all around the world are just going to unknowingly drop vials of stuff that is the blue virus. And that's just fucking amazing, right, Matt?
Yeah, well, we're going to wipe out the human race to avoid staining the honor of the U.S. military.
Yeah,
it's really quite the commentary on tribal thinking.
Mm-hmm. We can't be blamed for this. We just can't be. So let's kill everyone.
Yeah, because I was thinking about this, and it's like this is actually the kind of virus that you could contain, despite how how poorly they succeeded in doing that in the U.S. Because you could do the thing where you like if you know it's over there, but it's not in your town yet, you could actually set up barricades
Hmm.
and keep people from coming. And then if everyone else died, because they would after like a couple weeks, right? Then you could wait it out.
Yeah.
Because that's how deadly it is.
Yeah, I mean, it burns very quickly, and that's actually not great for a virus itself.
Right,
Like it kind of wants to have like that was actually one of the big problems with COVID, at least at the start, was that it had an incubation time of days to weeks, right?
right.
And so you could be walking around feeling 100% fine with a virus inside you and
Yeah.
infecting other people. This thing just burns through you so quickly. If you actually manage to isolate it, yes, all the people in that particular area are like definitely going to die, but yeah, it would theoretically burn itself off rather quickly and just die.
But they have made sure that cannot happen.
Yep. They have indeed. Thank you, US government. Then Starkey from here kind of goes on and on about a poet his daughter made him read once, a poet that he pronounced Yeats, which is wonderful. It's so good. I think not only do I love that he pronounces Yeats, but I love that the other man he's talking to throughout this knows that it's pronounced Yates, but doesn't say anything because he doesn't want to hurt the feelings of his commanding officer, or I guess not even commanding officer anymore. And isn't that like the whole fucking problem, that
Yeah.
like everyone in this organization like is completely unwilling to tell the people in charge something, and then a virus gets out and kills the entire world.
Yeah, you're right. I think there's definitely some interesting commentary being made with this other character, Creighton, I guess is his name, because Starkey is your classic like guy who has drank the military Kool-Aid so hard that he seems like the kind of I love the smell of napalm in the morning type guy.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
but Creighton is the guy who worships that guy. He's the guy who thinks that guy is just so awesome and that he can do no wrong, and sheds a tear when he gives the speech about sacrificing your life, and so it's like there's sort of two different caricatures being played here, I think.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree with that. That's great. So the poem that Starkey is referencing here is one called "The Second Coming" by Yates. This is probably like one of the most pop culture referenced poems ever. I'd never actually read the whole thing, but I've definitely heard pieces of this, pulled into different pieces of pop culture. I'm not going to read the whole poem because it's not that it's long, but that's a lot of airtime to read the poem. But I did copy it in here for us so we could just have a conversation about it, because I think this is really interesting, right? The big parts that Starkey is calling out is this beginning right here, where it says, "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." And I think this is fun in talking about Starkey and who he is as a person, but I also think it's fun to take a step back and maybe compare this precisely to what seems to be happening in this book as a whole, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, one funny thing is that Starkey fails at basic literary comprehension because he is the end of the world. He is the Antichrist. He is it's the second coming is not really talking about Jesus. It's talking about the Antichrist and Satan, basically. So every time a new one of those image generating AIs comes out, I give it the prompt, which end is this poem. "And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born."
Oh my God.
And it always generates something super freaky and disturbing and fucked up. And I sort of feel like I'm like, summoning something that I shouldn't. And I always am like, I shouldn't tamper with these forces, should I? But yeah, it's a great poem. And Starkey is sort of evidently focusing on the wrong part of it, actually.
Yeah, like he's focusing on like you're absolutely right. The center cannot hold. That is the part he's focusing. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Well, you loosed it, guy.
Yeah.
And this idea that like the tragedy of this actually is the center is falling apart is anarchy is happening. The tragedy of this thing is that we are losing our grip of control on the world, not that millions upon millions upon millions of people, billions of people are about to die.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's actually kind of delightful is that he's the one who brings up the poem and he's just misunderstanding it.
Yeah. And the way that King sets that up is by his mispronunciation, right? Like, I know, like, we mispronounce a lot of things on this show, and that happens sometimes, but his insistence of the word Yeats is so silly, but it also perfectly demonstrates his misunderstanding of the man and of his poetry, right?
Yeah, and I've never tried to commit omnicide on the basis of any of my literary readings, so I think we can be forgiven for that.
But the poem also does mention, it's worth saying, somewhere in the sands of the desert, a man appears, the shape with a lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun. It's moving its slow thighs while all about it real shadows of the indignant desert birds. So that's pretty powerful image. Of course, that is, as you said, the Antichrist. That I love the idea of the second coming being reversed in meaning, right? Like,
yeah,
a lot of times when people say they're talking about the second coming of Christ himself, right? This is kind of, yes, a signal of the end of the world, but also Christ coming to bring us all home. But this is definitely the Antichrist here.
And also, of course, the imagery there, what you just described, let's set aside the lion body, but we have, walking slowly through the desert, basically against the backdrop of darkness. We're describing the scene where we're about to meet the dark man.
It's so interesting because this part of the poem is not in the story, right? Starkey doesn't actually quote the whole Yates poem. This second stanza is not the focus of his understanding of the poem. But if you read this poem and then read the Randall Flagg chapter that we're about to get to, it's obvious King was channeling this poem when he was writing those words. Like, I think that is 100% true.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've never said this explicitly, but it is fun to think about the Man in Black, Flagg, Odin, whatever, as King's vision of the Antichrist and what that means in sort of all of its ramifications. Maybe something to keep in mind for this book, at least.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, as we said, Starkey leaves his old friend and colleague Crichton in charge and then heads down to the cafeteria Project Blue. This is the place that he's been like obsessively watching the monitor of the dead corpses. And we learn very quickly that he's kind of just going down there to die. I love this moment, Matt, where he picks up Private Bruce's head out of the soup bowl. And I just love the detail of like the time, like, I know this is a very long book, and so it has the room to sprawl and do this kind of detail, but like look at this. I just love this so much. Then he pulled Frank D. Bruce's head up by its hair. The soup bowl came with him, still stuck on his face by soup which had long since congealed, and Starkey struck at it in horror, finally knocking it off. The bowl clunked on the floor upside down. Most of the soup still clung to Frank D. Bruce's face like moldy jelly. Starkey produced his handkerchief and wiped off as much of it as he could. Frank D. Bruce's eyes appeared to be gummed shut by soup, but Starkey forbore to wipe the lids. Like, I love this, like the detail of it, and of course the symbolism of it, right? He killed this man. It's his fault. He was in charge. He was the one running this thing. This man is dead, inadvertently or advertently because of him. And he's like desperately trying to clean him up. There's a lot of symbolism and imagery around taking care of the dead in this week's reading. A lot of it. And I think this is our first little bit of it, that he's trying at least to take care of the dead here. Failing, by the way, failing.
Yeah. Doing such a bad job that the guy who's watching on the monitor is like, you've made it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right though. That is the theme of this week's reading is people, either are freshly dead or just finishing dying, and our characters have to, they have to deal with that in some ways. Some of them just ignore the problem, right? We'll get to that. But again, I just want to mention like the thing I said a minute ago, where we're sort of sitting with the mundanity, the practical reality of mass death here. Like we're sitting around with the sick, the slowly dying, the bodies, the smells. This is the part that I feel like a lot of I don't know what to call it, but generally speaking, like disaster and mass death fiction, it just kind of fast forwards past this
Yeah.
and gets to the later part where it's like, now we're in a cool post-apocalypse where you can do your Mad Max stuff, and it's like this book really wants to spend the time on like the loss and sorrow and reality of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's so good.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. I'm being really hyperbolic this week, and that's because like I am not kidding you folks. Like the time I've spent with this book over the last few weeks has been an absolute joy. Like I love sitting here when I read the pages for this show, I read them at a much slower, closer pace than I normally would if I was just sitting down reading casually. I got my highlighter out, I'm highlighting, and it's like it's filled me with so much happiness. Like it's just, I mean, this is a very depressing part of the book, but it's everything about this is working on me in every possible way it could.
Yeah, it's like a Bosch painting. It's a work of genius of a horrifying subject.
There you go. Yeah. So we move on to chapter 23, and as we said, we recognize someone here, Matt. We see right away that it's our old pal Randy Flagg. I think this is one of those things that I'm fairly confident is one of the things you osmosed about The Stand, that Randall Flagg made an appearance in it. Is that an accurate statement?
It is. Although what's funny is this is hardly the Randall Flagg I was expecting. But yes, I did know that Randall Flagg was in this book.
Yeah. And that's kind of why we're reading this book. It's if Randall Flagg appears here. I mean, it's not the only reason we have, Captain Trips and the virus itself explicitly mentioned in the pages of Wizard and Glass, but also Randall Flagg is our baddie here. So before we get into the Randall Flagg we see here, I just wanted to kind of recap for us a bit here, because we've seen a lot of Randall Flagg over the few years we've been doing this podcast, right? We first met him as the man in black that Roland is chasing across the desert, aka Walter O'Dim, aka Martin Broadcloak, Stephen Deschain's magician and advisor, aka the good man sometimes, but not all the times, but maybe sometimes.
Uh-huh.
The Flagg we met in the Dark Tower books was this confident, manipulative, and a little bit kooky guy, right? We see him various times throughout the Dark Tower. We learn that he's kind of just the henchman of an even greater power in the Crimson King. Flagg is kind of rarely at the forefront of the Dark Tower story, actually. There are one or two key moments he pops out in the Wizard of Oz section in Wizard and Glass, and then, of course, in the Dark Tower when he meets his end thanks to Roland's spider baby Mordred. We will then see Flagg again, and we did see Flagg again in the book The Eyes of the Dragon. He's here another advisor to another king, but this Randall Flagg is much more closer to your classic fantasy interpretation of an evil wizard or sorcerer, right? He successfully plots to have the king killed and his son Peter blamed for it, but is ultimately discovered and forced to flee the kingdom, but not before losing his eye. And that's the last time we've seen Randall Flagg in our journey through the Dark Tower and beyond. Though I will say there are multiple stories in King's universe, some of which you've read, Matt, some of which you haven't, where we see characters with the initials R and F, and they tend to enter the story and make a mess of things. There is a character in one of the later Hearts in Atlantis stories that I know you read. The character's name is Raymond Feigler. That is almost certainly Randall Flagg, although the book never explicitly confirms that. So that is our history of Randall Flagg, right? And so this Randall Flagg here is chronologically in King's career the world's introduction to the character, right? He had not written the Dark Tower series yet. He had not written Hearts in Atlantis. He had not written the Eyes of the Dragon yet. This is our first Randall Flagg right here. And as you said, he's a little different from all those other people. Like no two Randall Flaggs are exactly the same, but I would say the Eyes of the Dragon and the Dark Tower versions of Flagg are much closer to each other than either is to the version we see here in this chapter.
Absolutely. From our decidedly Dark Tower oriented perspective, the thing that jumps out to me is that he says where he was born and when. Mm-hmm. Which conflicts explicitly with information that we know about, the other versions of the Dark Man.
Yeah.
This kind of plays interestingly with our theory that maybe Randall Flagg is like a kind of a different person in different worlds or in different cycles or something like that. And then maybe there are lots of him actually, and they're all kind of the same, but kind of not. That they're all kind of maybe twinners of each other in a sense.
Yeah, and how much awareness there is of them across each other, right? Because it doesn't seem like this, and maybe the story could contradict this later, but it doesn't seem like this Randall Flagg is the type that would be generally aware of all these other things he's doing in other worlds. Like, I think one of the things that's really interesting about this is we see him as kind of like a cowboy, right? He's kind of like an American cowboy who's like walking the roads of America at night, just fucking shit up. And the text even describes this as his country, right? It's very specific. There is something very specifically American about this version of Randall Flagg. And I think, like, look at the way this is written, though. He walked south on US 51, the worn heels of his sharp-toed cowboy boots clocking on the pavement, a tall man of no age in faded peg jeans and a denim jacket. His pockets were stuffed with 50 different kinds of conflicting literature, pamphlets for all seasons, rhetoric for all reasons. When this man handed you a tract, you took it no matter what the subject. The dangers of atomic power plants, the role played by the international Jewish cartel to overthrow the friendly governments, the CIA-Contra cocaine connection, the farm workers' unions, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the blacks up for militant equality, the code of the Klan. He had them all, and more, too. There was one button on each breast of his denim jacket. On the right, a yellow smile face. On the left, a pig wearing a policeman's cap. The legend was written beneath in letters which dripped to simulate blood. How's your pork? So he is, a cowboy, an American, and also an equal opportunity fuck with her, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You begin to think maybe he doesn't believe any of these things. He just wants to see people suffer. So one thing about this intro description in particular that struck me, strikes me again as I see it on the page here, is he kind of feels like an evil Roland. Compare this introduction to our introduction to Roland and the Gunslinger. There's a focus on what Roland is carrying, what he's wearing, kind of what his visage, strikes you as, not necessarily like exactly what his feature looks like, but like he had the face of a blank, not necessarily exactly the same language. I'm not saying that it's like intentionally paralleled. Even, I don't know, maybe it could be, maybe King thought back to the way he introduced the Man in Black and kind of introduced Roland in a way that was paralleled in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, the timeline here is really interesting, right? Because technically King started the Dark Tower series, The Gunslinger, when he was 19 years old, right? That's the first draft of what would eventually become The Gunslinger was written before The Stand, technically. But we don't know what the shape of that was. We don't know what it looked like. And it's certainly true, doylistically, that I just don't think at the time King thought the Man in Black was going to be Randall Flagg. That feels it and has always felt to me like something he decided on later. And that's why there is this kind of ongoing weirdness with he's Martin, but the Man in Black, but Walter O'Dim, but also Randall. Like, I think it's just because King decided after the fact that he was going to tie all these characters together into this one person. But yeah, I mean, it certainly is fun to think of from a Watsonian perspective of how all this ties together, and I love that comparison. I love this version of Randall Flagg being an anti-Roland in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're going to go any further in that direction. It just struck me, particularly the character introduction. And for all I know, this is just the way King writes character introductions. But
it could be these specific kind of characters.
Well, yeah, because it's a really important character. Like, you can already tell he's waited to introduce his character, right? We've spent so much time with our main characters already, and only now are we being introduced to Randall Flagg in this book, which means it's like we've built towards something momentous with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're totally right. Speaking of the writing, let's just read this as well, because I just love this. It was the face of a hatefully happy man, a face that radiated a horrible, handsome warmth. A face that to make water glasses shatter in the hands of tired truck stop waitresses, to make small children crash their trikes into board fences and then run wailing to their mommies with stake-shaped splinters sticking out of their knees. It was a face guaranteed to make barroom arguments over batting averages turn bloody. Oh, that's so good, man. I just
Yeah.
like, I love it feels to me like this is a remarkably written book across the board, but it does feel to me, as you said, King knows how important this character is going to be and knows how important this introduction is. And it's like he's pulling out all the stops for this. It's like, you know, if he's at a 10 on his writing scale, like he's like, all right, it's the Randall Flagg intro chapter. I got to go to 11. And it's just page after page. This is actually a chapter with very, very long paragraphs, something that you don't see much in King stories, where he has paragraphs that span an entire page or sometimes 2 pages in just description. And it's really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think some of his books are definitely more sort of soaring and airy, and I mean, purple is the pejorative way of saying it, but like focusing on having elaborate prose. And this book so far has actually not been that. This book has mostly been kind of a very straightforward way of presenting like the events and the characters and the characters' thoughts. He always has that flair to everything that he does, but it hasn't been like, for example, you know, Salem's Lot, where we spend all this time like waxing poetic about the power lines or whatever, the phone lines rather. But like here, I think with the Flagg introduction, we do go full on King poetic.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it works. It really works.
Yeah.
So we learn that like this is kind of what Randall Flagg does, right? He just walks around making barroom arguments turn bloody, right? He wanders around America looking for situations he can turn to his advantage, you know, pulling out these pamphlets, instigating, starting conflict. I love how it describes he was a clot looking for a place to happen, a splinter of bone hunting a soft organ to puncture, a lonely lunatic cell looking for a mate. They would set up housekeeping and raise themselves a cozy little malignant tumor. I love that imagery so much. A clot looking for a place to happen. Oh my God, it's so good.
No, nothing to add. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So we see here, this is kind of where King establishes the RF thing, because we see he's one RF in one place, another RF in the other. He's on all sides. He'll you know, work with the Black Panthers, but also work with the Klan. No allegiances, no political affiliation, just an equal opportunity cancer. Wants to be involved in everything, and he delights in it. He enjoys it. That's the thing that I think we need to focus on here. At least in this chapter, we have not seen any motive outside of just, it makes me happy to do these things. I don't have a grander plan. I don't have a grander design. I just, it makes me happy to do these things.
For sure. I get the sense this Crimson King, that this Dark Man is actually not like a servant of the Crimson King who, or at least if he is, he doesn't know that he is, right? We see no evidence of that, and we're sort of peeking into his head here. So,
yeah, definitely. And I think that is, to me, one of the key things about Randall Flagg, at least the version that's seen in this book. He influences, he pushes, he prods, he escalates, but he doesn't ever start, right? Like we see he goes to Oswald in New Orleans in the early 60s and kind of pushes him towards his eventual Kennedy assassination, but he didn't like put the thought in Oswald's head, right? Like he didn't create that. He just kind of fostered it a little bit. And I think this to me is really key, because one of the things we see definitively in this chapter is Randall Flagg had absolutely nothing to do with Captain Trips, right? He doesn't release it. He isn't part of, you know, the random fuck up that caused it to be released. He didn't even know about it until he's just walking down the road and just like smells the change it's bringing on the wind and realizes he can use this as an opportunity to make more mischief, and to kind of assume his role as a usherer of a new world order type thing. And I do think this is really, really key. I do think it's really, really key to what King is saying, is that we did this to ourselves. We did this to ourselves. And there are these things out there and people out there like Randall Flagg that will see a terrible, awful event like this and view it as an opportunity. And I think that's really important.
While simultaneously not blaming it all on those people. Yes.
Yeah.
So my take on him at this point is that he specifically delights in seeing people choose to do evil, terrible things. It's no fun for him if he does all the work. It's only fun for him if they, you know, show themselves to truly be awful. that's what he wants to see. So he helps create the context where they can do that, but they have to actually take that leap themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what I extract from this kind of list of the things that he does, like where he shows up to a meeting of shouting revolutionaries and they calm down, and that gets them to the work of, focusing on building bombs. And it's like, well, what did he really do? Oh, he just told them to calm down. He didn't.
Yeah.
How does that push them toward evil? Right. It's like, so
well, yeah. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. He's really great. I really enjoy him in this book. I think you're going to as well. And I think this opening chapter is a great indication of, the type of character he's going to be here.
Excellent.
So we see here at the very end of the chapter that, like we said, he tastes on the air the change that is coming. I love how the text described this as if God was planning a cookout and all of civilization was going to be the barbecue. There's been a lot of God talk in this book so far, Matt, and I think you could write a lot of it off as just like, King was raised religious, not super religious anymore, but he talks about God a lot. But I think having a character like Randall Flagg, who has been compared to the Antichrist already, reference God here in being responsible for this great end of the world, the second flood, I guess we could call it, is a really interesting thing to do.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I could pay attention to all these associations for sure.
So we also learned that this time is indicating a great change for him as well. His time of transfiguration was at hand. And then it says, why else could he suddenly do magic? And Randall Flagg suddenly floats. He lifts himself up and floats above the road a few feet. And so, wow, that's again. So we have the magician is here. We see magician wizard Randall Flagg is back. But again, this is a Randall Flagg that like seemingly just learned that they could do magic, not that they were like knew they were a wizard, Harry, and then had to like relearn, like they had their power taken away from them or something, and only this opportunity grants them. This is like something new is happening to him, and he's changing in some way, and what comes with that is power.
And we're not clear on what exactly he can do, but I maybe I was misinterpreting the lead up to this, but like it almost seemed like there was a kind of magic that he had before he could, float off the ground. But it was more of a social engineering magic where, he sort of had that like gray man ability to walk into a room and nobody would remember him. Nobody would quite remember his face, even though he had, made important suggestions. And it's like, is that meant to be a kind of magic, or is that just meant to be like, no, this is just who he is. This is his personality. This has always been him. There's no need to invoke magic there. I kind of felt like it seemed magical the way it was described, but maybe it was just like supposed to seem uncanny and unnerving, but not necessarily magical.
Yeah, I never took that as explicitly magical, but very possible for sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think he's just kind of an upsetting, uncomfortable, and yet strangely convincing person, so yeah. Could we link that to his general magic qualities? Sure. Like he just has a presence about him, and we could call that a magical presence or just a mundane presence. Obviously magic exists in the story. We've just seen a man float above the earth, so yeah, this is happening. So it really, I think it really doesn't make sense to quibble. Like I'm not going to push you on that and be like, no, you're wrong, Matt. But yeah, I never saw it that way, but
right. It's funny because we can be like, well, everybody in his book says The Shining, so he probably just says The Shining, but it's like, no, like let's be serious. He clearly hadn't thought of that when he wrote The Stand. Like, mm-hmm. Like we're imposing something upon the story that is convenient for us as Dark Tower readers, but like I don't really think that's what he was thinking at the time.
Yeah, and this is one of those moments where I'm not 100% sure on this, but this is one of the things I'm more confident on, that I do not think the original 1978 version of this story had Randall Flagg do magic in this introductory chapter explicitly. So this is something he kind of added back. So
okay, cool.
All right, let's move on to chapter 24. So we move from the big bad to a lesser bad. We're back, Matt, with our old friend Lloyd, who we learn is in a bit of trouble here. And this is one of those Stephen King digressions that I actually absolutely love here, because the majority of this chapter, this is like a 10-page chapter. We spend probably 9.5 pages of this chapter having Lloyd talk with his court-appointed attorney about how he's going to get the death penalty. And not only that, he's going to be fast-tracked for the death penalty. Like, they're going to do this from trial to your death. It's going to be like weeks, buddy. You're fucked. And we know going into this chapter that this shit isn't going to matter, right? We by the end of this week's reading, we have witnessed basically the absolute collapse of society. And so we know that he's never going to sit in the electric chair, because everyone's going to be dead by the time that happens. So we already know that a captain named Trips is going to give Lloyd that stay of execution. And yet we take the time in this chapter to go through beat by beat the exact ways in which Lloyd is screwed by the system. And it works still. Like, it shouldn't work. This is completely superfluous. It shouldn't work, but it really does to me.
I think it makes it fun. Like, because you're totally 100% right that, like, we know Lloyd's going to get out of this scot-free. So I think what's enjoyable is the dramatic irony, actually, that like, you know, the lawyer is like, oh man, you really fucked up, Lloyd. You don't even know you could be executed inside of 2 weeks. And Lloyd's like, oh no, I never expected this. This is, and we're sitting there kind of chuckling, like, even 2 weeks is too long. This prison's going to be totally emptied out within a week.
Yeah.
And so it turns it from like, instead of feeling like, oh man, I'm worried about Lloyd, we're actually just kind of grinning to ourselves, knowing like, no, it's not how it's going to go down.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I kind of wanted to talk about here is the idea of the end of the world being an opportunity for certain characters, and the ways in which the different characters represent that. Because obviously in this moment for Lloyd, the world ending is like the best possible thing that could happen for him, right? Because he was going to die. He was going to be given the death penalty. Like, I think his lawyer said he might be able to get him off, but like 90% sure you're going to end up in the chair. And so the world ending provides Lloyd an opportunity to escape from the consequences of his actions. And so, like, I think it's fun to kind of sit back here and think of all the characters we met so far and think of what the end of the world affords those characters. And I think it's interesting, the characters that are like explicitly bad are getting an opportunity to escape from the consequences of the bad things that they were doing, where the characters that seem more good, like Nick, don't necessarily view the end of the world as an opportunity. You know, in fact, it is something that is kind of, he almost had a home and that was taken away from him. And then we have a character like Larry, who is kind of right in the middle of that, right? Like, it's not like he gets off scot-free from anything, but also the end of the world does provide him with a distinct opportunity to redefine who he is and who he wants to be as a person. So I think this is really interesting, and we should continue to pay attention to it. Totally
agree with your comment about Larry. I was gonna jump on that and say like there's a little bit of both for him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the lawyer here kind of lays it out for us, and I think this is King also kind of giving us his view on capital punishment. So we basically learn here that in this world, at least, the Supreme Court has decided that the only cruel and unusual part of the death penalty is that it takes too long. That from sentencing to execution takes so long, and it is cruel and unusual to put people under that amount of strain, knowing that their imminent death is coming for that long. So the way to avoid that cruel and unusual part of it is to fast track it. So they've got something like called the Markham Rule, which means they just fast track any trial that the prosecution is going for death penalty on. So they turn what would last years and years and years into just a few weeks instead. This is a fun idea, and I think it allows King to kind of draw out the absurdity of capital punishment as a thing that we still do. But also, it's completely made up. Like, I don't think the government would ever actually do something like this. It's wild.
Yeah,
it's just wild.
It's just wild and dumb enough to be real. But I don't remember anything like that ever actually happening.
Yeah. But I mean, do you think that this is King kind of doing a little in-book commentary on the absurdity of capital punishment as a thing in the first place. Like there's a lot of, I think, joking around about like, oh yeah, so they're just trying to decide which of the parts of it is cruel and unusual, and it turns out it's not the death part, it's the waiting part.
Yeah.
Like there's some like winking absurdity at this that fits very well in a Lloyd chapter, because there's like Lloyd chapters have this very specific tone to them, I think. It really works here to me.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there is a kind of madness implicit in a country that would work on a virus that could kill everyone on the planet, or decide that like the way to solve the problem of people being upset about the fact that the government is allowed to kill people is to kill them faster so they don't have time to worry. Like it's a very like you could totally be right, and it could be a specific pointed commentary about the death penalty. But what I see it as is another sort of head of the hydra of his critique of just like the innate just total madness of the the government and the military industrial complex and all of these things in the in America, right? It's the book is very hard on America, actually.
Yeah, I like that. I like that better, actually. Yeah, I like that better as less specific and more broad. This fucking country. That's great.
And maybe I say that partly because I feel like after kind of the double header of the Talisman and Black House, I think I see this critique emerging that King is sort of he has some very specific things to say about America.
Yeah.
And they're complicated. It's not a straightforward condemnation, I don't think. But he definitely has some things to get off his chest. So I think that's what some of this is.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right, so we move on to chapter 25. We're back with Nick, as things in Shoyo have gone from very bad to very worse, Matt. Nick describes it all as a waking nightmare. And I really love the overall motif of this chapter being this thing where Nick is sitting here watching all these people around him die, and he's frustrated that due to being mute, he cannot offer them any kind of words of or reassurances. This is the thing it's really frustrating him, and it frustrates him again and again throughout this chapter, that he wants to be able to speak to these people and offer them reassurances, but he can't. And I love that the kind of the resolution of this chapter, to me, is at least, is just because you cannot speak doesn't mean you can't help people and offer those reassurances and be someone that is there for them in the worst moments of their life, the end of their life.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. This part is just this desolate, haunting, moving sequence. It's actually a really powerful contrast to kind of the comedy of the Lloyd chapter we just finished.
Yeah, and it's kind of remarkable how they slide next to each other just fine. Like, at no point in my reading did I feel any kind of tone shock from turning the page from a Lloyd chapter into a Nick chapter. From a Lloyd chapter that ends with him talking about how my lawyer counted every one of my teeth, 17, to a Nick chapter where he's watching people he's grown to care about die and is at their bed when they're breathing their last. Yeah, the tone management, I think, is pretty remarkable. And I don't exactly know how that works. I think it's just both characters are believable. And so you just accept their tone whenever you're with them, and it doesn't feel incongruous between them.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah.
So back at the prison, one of three Nick's prisoners are dead. The other two are getting irate and they're terrified. Nick feels like he must do something with the body, and he decides to painstakingly drag it out of the cell, down a steep flight of stairs into the basement of the police station. Basically, in essence, not technically, but he's burying the body. But Nick is lost. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know if anyone else will be coming, and he's unable to call anyone to ask. And so we get this chapter where this character feels very trapped and very isolated, even as people around him continue to die.
Yeah, you really feel for him. And he's just kind of, everybody's dealing with what's happening in different ways, right? And for him, I think this is a very Nick thing, is that he just does things. Like, he's just trying to help. He's just doing things. He's not really spending a lot of time on introspection. There's some amount of it, but it's more problem solving. It's more doing, and outward focused actions. And he is basically overwhelmed by the magnitude of the disaster, because he's not really able to think clearly enough to like come up with good plans. He's just sort of solving problems that appear before him.
Yeah.
Which is totally understandable. It's just a situation that generates a lot of sympathy.
Yeah, especially since he's a man who, was kind of handed this responsibility by someone he doesn't know very well, and he takes it extremely serious despite that. Like he's got these three men he's kind of been charged with taking care of, and they're locked up, and he's waiting for the state troopers to come get them, and he just doesn't know what to do. And like I feel like 60% of all other men would just be like, fuck these guys. They're not my responsibility. Someone will come get them. I'm out. But Nick can't do that. Nick takes that responsibility seriously. Nick takes his responsibility to Jane Baker seriously. Like, these are all things that he could very easily just shrug off and walk away from, but he doesn't. And I think that is a really important characteristic of Nick, for sure.
Yes, he's very honorable, for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of honorable, he goes around desperately trying to get help. He tries to ride out to the edge of town to see the construction workers / soldiers there to see if they'll help him. They're all gone and dead in a ditch. He goes from house to house in the town, but sees they're all empty, or there's sick people in there that are unwilling or unable to help him. Eventually, Nick's second prisoner dies, and he's only got one left at this point, Mike. He finally realizes at this point that no one is coming, and he lets Mike go, who thankfully repays the favor by just leaving, not doing anything to Nick.
Yeah, part of me expected Mike to try to pull some shit, but
I did too. I have a distinct memory of having that same fear, and I wonder where that comes from. Is my lack of faith in humanity, or just it seemed like the perfect opportunity to repay someone for their kindness is to just like get a swift second beat up session and then go on your way. But no, Mike just leaves.
Yeah, I think it's more realistic, honestly, that he would be, too freaked out to be thinking about revenge right now.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah. And I love this line. Like, this is the innate goodness of Nick, right? Like, Nick watched him until he was out of sight and then went back inside. He never saw Mike again. His heart felt lighter, and he was suddenly sure that he had done the right thing. He lay down on the cot and went to sleep almost at once. So, this is like, it's very important for Nick to feel like they've done the right thing. And I like this idea that like the story grants him this moment of happiness, and that he's like really wrestling with, what do I do? What do I do? I'm responsible for these people. I can't just let them go, but I don't know what to do. Finally, he makes the decision. He lets him go, and he just knows that he did the right thing there. And it feels good for him. I love it. I love Nick.
Me too. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. So the next day, Nick borrows a TV and watches the news, expecting to hear word on what's been going on with this whole virus thing. But all the news stations are completely minimizing the virus. The only big announcement is that gatherings have been temporarily canceled. And reading that phrase was not a flashback at all to a couple of years ago.
Yep, just 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yeah, we're going to flatten the curve, folks. Just cancel. It's all going to be fine.
Yeah.
So we learn here that like Nick is watching these newscasters, and because he's deaf, he's not listening to them, but more watching what they're doing. And we realize here that there are clearly people just off camera making them say these things, that the newscasters are very uncomfortable and scared and while they're reading the news. And that is kind of a hint towards what we're going to be focusing on in a couple chapters with the full state of the government's apparatus to control information.
There's something very fun, though, about reading between the lines. And, we know what's going on. Nick doesn't. That we're able to read between the lines and understand maybe some elements of what's really going on. Because the newscasters, some of the things they say are true, and then they'll be like, but it's not a big deal, And you're like, okay, so we can infer what was probably actually happening there.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun, actually.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk way more about those newscasters and what King is doing with that stuff in a couple chapters.
Yeah.
Actually, next chapter. So finally, Nick heads back to the Bakers, where we see that poor Jane Baker is finally dying. She was one of the ones that seems, unfortunately, like really hung around for a while. The virus kind of did its ups and downs with her, teased her into thinking she was getting better and then redoubling on her, which really is just mean. It's just mean.
Yeah. I mean, everything with like there's a lot of characters in this story that are worthy of our, sympathy as humans, but I think Jane Baker and her husband, our sheriff, are kind of the two most like perfectly upstanding, honorable, lovely, just good people,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
watching them die has been one of the just saddest parts, actually.
I agree. So Jane has one final request for Nick before she dies, that she be dressed in the white dress she originally wore on her honeymoon. Nick, who once again is frustrated that he cannot offer her any words of comfort, promises her that he will dress her in it when she's gone. And here's something that Jane says before she goes, Matt. Love is what moves the world, I've always thought. It's the only thing which allows men and women to stand in a world where gravity always seems to want to pull them down, bring them low, and make them crawl. We were so much in love. So that's probably not important.
No, that certainly didn't jump out at me. No, I'm joking. It did actually. Like I heard that and I was like, okay, I see what we're doing. It's really hard. It's really hard to stand in this world because the world's always trying to pull you down.
Yeah.
And somebody like Larry, for example, is a guy who he has a lot of trouble standing, but maybe he has that steel. Maybe he can do it. Maybe he can. Yeah. We want to see him do it. Like we crave that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. And I know you talked about this in the very first episode, that the book title is always kind of in your mind while reading this, and I think it's great because like this is a book about the end of the world, about a virus that kills almost everyone. What is the stand? What does that mean? What do you do? Why did you call it that? And I think we're starting to see the shape of that with little quotes like this, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I forget which Dark Tower book it is, but in one of them, Roland has this amazing speech that he just ends with like, and we will stand. And it's, not like explicitly the stand reference, but it's pretty clear that I think King is using it in the same sense as he's using it here.
Well, and if you recall, one of the final lines of Dark Tower 7, as Roland walks through the door, is perhaps next time you'll do better. Perhaps you'll succeed. You have to stand. You have to be true. Is like the final line. So
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And so Jane Baker passes away. Nick, who doesn't want the responsibility of having to deal with her burial, is kind of frustrated that this has come down to him. Also simultaneously knows that there's no one else to do it. And so he does it. He honors her request. He dresses her in the white dress that she asked to be dressed in. And then he picks her up and carries her to the funeral home. And I do think this is the defining characteristic of Nick Andros. We kind of talked about this already, but he barely knows this woman, right? He's interacted with this woman for basically less than a week. She and her husband were kind to him like one time, and that's it. And yet he still takes it upon himself to ensure that her final wish is delivered. He still takes it upon himself to pick up this body and take it to a funeral home, which who knows what it's actually going to do there, because I don't think they're going to be taking time to bury people right now. But that's kind of where we leave him. But I think this is really important. And this is where I want to reiterate something we talked about earlier. Burial and disposal of people and care of the things people leave behind when they die, their bodies, is, I think, a big signifier in this story. Like we said, in this chapter, Nick lifts the corpses of the two prisoners that were in his charge that die, and he drags them down into the basement. Not exactly a burial, but we are like shown, the text really reinforces that this is difficult work. This is hard work. It's exhausting for him. These are heavy men. A dead weight, is really freaking heavy. This is hard work for him. He then does a similar thing for Jane Baker at the end of the chapter. And I think this is echoed rather clearly in Franny's chapter, right? We're going to get to that in a few minutes, but a big chunk of her chapter is burying her father. So like, I think burial, or more specifically, the taking of responsibility and showing of respect for dead people, is a key signifier in this book, of people behaving rightly, goodly, versus people not. And Matt, who's the people not burying people or not respecting or taking care or responsibility of the bodies of their loved ones? Well, there's the U.S. government at large, right? Who we learn in the next chapter is like just dumping bodies after bodies in the ocean by the truckload. But But baby, can you dig this? Larry Underwood,
Mhm.
who we'll see in a couple chapters, just abandons the body of his mother with a note on it when he can't deal with it anymore.
Yep. Just, I mean, he doesn't do nothing, but he just kind of runs away as he has run away from everything else in his life. Absolutely.
Yep. So what do you think of this burial as a signifier of quality of character?
Oh yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's once again, this is one of those things that I feel like 95% of the other disaster stories skip over, is the part where there's dead bodies everywhere, including the bodies of your loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's terribly sad, and you're like traumatized by it, but there's something deeply human about the idea that, like, you know, no, you're not just going to leave the body there, and you're not just going to drag the body like outside into a ditch and let, you know, or you know, maybe you will, like, maybe like, and that's the thing is I was actually thinking about this. This is I don't think a tangent. I think this is like the kind of thing the book prompts you to think about. Is you're like, if I was in this sort of a disaster, this sort of a nightmare, would I prioritize burying the dead? Because it's like, you can't possibly, like, everyone is dead. You can't, like I think you would feel some level of compulsion to care for your loved ones, but that's almost like a self-soothing behavior, because you're like, I can't bear to see their body like this, right?
Yeah.
Like part of me wants to be practical minded and be like, I need to focus on survival. I need to just like not care about this. But I think the you know, the story is pointing out that, like, I think you inevitably would feel like this is what you needed to do, even if it's obviously it's not a matter of life and death. Like
Yeah.
Nick puts a lot of effort into doing something that is, strictly speaking, like, not going to help him survive this disaster.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it is a big sign of his character that he would still do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an important note of closure for the people that are remaining alive, but I think it's also a sign of respect for the person that you have lost. Yeah, I was thinking about this a lot this week, and actually, like, it's kind of remarkable how we've evolved and how, like, societal norms have evolved. Like, the burial of dead people in society is just like a practical solution to a problem of what do we do with the corpses of the people in our community, right? Like, we can't have those just hanging around. It's not sanitary, it's not good. So, like, what do we do with them? Well, we bury them. And then, so of course we attach huge societal, spiritual, and you know, moral things to this practical solution to a problem. It's like that's what we do. That's what civilization does. It's just kind of remarkable.
Yeah. Well, Scott, if you and I are ever in a horrible disaster situation and I die and you need to focus on survival, I want you to drag my body out onto the street for the coyotes. Okay.
Okay.
You don't need to worry about dressing me in my finest and burying me. Okay.
Okay. Noted. I want you to bury me, and 6 feet is not enough, Matt. 12 feet deep.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm a man of my word. So
you can take breaks to hunt if you want, but
12 feet, and like, I assume like a good, like, 7 foot by 4 foot wide hole, right?
Oh yeah. I'm tall. I'm not gonna be like, I'm not gonna like get cramped in my hole.
Just dig like a vertical hole and just like drop you down like a.
That's awful. I don't know why I laugh. That's terrible. Oh my god. So that's where we leave Nick behind. He's heading to the funeral home to drop off the body of Jane Baker. And then where the hell is he going to go from here? Yeah, he doesn't know. So we certainly can't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad because he started this story basically on the road, aimless, and now he's back there.
Mm-hmm. So. All right, Matt. We head on to chapter 26. This is a tough chapter to talk about here. We've been kind of setting this up since the beginning, but this is an epistolary chapter where we walk through the concept of the center not holding, as Yates put it. And I think this is one of my favorite things that King does, honestly. And I think it's interesting to me because I think it almost flies in the face of what I would assume makes good writing. Like, to me, it just makes more sense to show the collapse of society and country through the lens of the characters that we now know and care about. And we are already doing that, right? Like, we get to see that through Larry. We get to see that through Franny. We get to see that through Nick very, very clearly and very, very well. We'll see that up close and personal, actually, in the next 2 chapters after this one. But I do also think that there's something just like ineffably rich and rewarding about making this specific kind of chapter as well. It's very similar to the Lot chapters we had in Salem's Lot, where we kind of zoomed out and flew around the town, or perhaps very similar to the opening 50 pages of Black House, where we just fly around and observe the town. This, we just kind of fly around America witnessing piece of horror after piece of horror after piece of horror. And I find it remarkably affecting, even if I would think that the other way would be a better way of doing this. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like this was one of the most upsetting parts of the book to me, actually, which is interesting because, like you said, we're not really rooted in any characters, but nonetheless, like the disgust and fury that I felt during this part was pretty remarkable, especially as we were watching the massacres and just horrible injustices that are being perpetrated by the military.
Yeah. Definitely. And again, I think it is kind of remarkable that you would think I would tell myself, oh, I'm not going to be emotionally invested in those things if I don't know any of the characters. And yet I think you're right. This is some of the most disturbing stuff in the book so far. And all of these people are basically nameless people who we meet, like either meet immediately before everything goes down, or frankly, never really meet at all. I think King just knows that even without that, the level of the horror on display here is enough to activate some sort of emotional response in you.
Yeah. It's pretty. I agree. I'm like surprised he was able to upset me as much as he was when it is this kind of floating point of view experience.
Yeah. So I don't think we're going to cover this like a usual chapter in our podcast, Matt, because there's really no need to go like beat by beat through every plot of every little section. Instead, I think it makes more sense for us to go kind of more high level than we normally go here and take a look at this chapter maybe as a whole instead. But before we do that, I just was curious which section or story had the biggest emotional impact on you. For me, for some reason, it was the Ray Flowers one, where he's kind of alone in his radio booth, just taking calls from people, just wanting to tell other people, to inform people about what's going on, or share their opinion, or spread some information about what's happening here. He's just kind of alone in his booth doing this and watching the government just break in and slaughter him, I think was the most affecting to me.
Yeah, I think for me it was either that one or it was the massacre of the college students, which was conveyed through basically us overhearing the radio chatter of the local police who, clearly they find this horrifying. They're trying, they're basically being good, upstanding, moral, everything you would hope that officers of the law would be, gunslingers, and they're just shocked and horrified. And I think part of the reason why that part was so effective is because the audiobook reader was sort of, performing the radio dialogue in a way that was really, really powerful. So it was really good.
I need to listen to that. So let's look at this though. I think the overarching theme of the chapter is, to me at least, the Fourth Estate battling back against the government to get the truth out there, right? It's this heroic tale of reporters, of journalists, of TV news anchors, of radio DJs, of small newspaper owners, and in some cases, as you said, just regular people, regular college students, risking life and limb to get information out to the people. And I mean, they get slaughtered, but they win technically, right? The information gets out. The government is completely unable to stop the spread of this information. And this caused a few different thoughts in me, and I kind of want to just walk through them with you as I was reading. Because the first thought was the government would be absolutely unable to stop this kind of information from disseminating at all in the world of the internet and social media, right? Like, we see that they're a failure here, but like in 2022, holy crap, they're like, they had to do this really complicated clandestine operation where they printed 1,000 copies of a newspaper and then secretly disseminated it and got those 1,000 copies out before the government found out about it and bombed the printing press, right? You don't have to do that anymore. You just hit post. And even if you immediately rip down the server that's holding the post, once it's out there on the internet, man, it's cached. And you're never going to be able to get rid of that thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, wow, this would be so much easier to disseminate information now than it was when this book was written. And then the thought I had immediately after that was, oh, they wouldn't have to, though. They would just disseminate their own misinformation.
Mm.
And I think that's one thing to me that this chapter doesn't show is how powerful misinformation is. Like, I think there's gestures to it here and there in the chapter. I really like the scene with the bikers who just like come across this guy with end of the world signs and just beat him up for overreacting. And I think we see little bits and pieces of how some of the population are like totally buying into and believing the government's narrative. But I think by and large, to me, this is a story about how the press fights City Hall and wins to the point that the information gets out there and the government's response is to be horrifying and monstrous. And the interesting thing about this to me is I think the one thing that King could never have possibly predicted in this book that people call very prescient is just how many people would go right along believing the lie, even when shown the truth. And then the sheer number of press people that they wouldn't have had to hold a gun up to get to walk in front of a camera and spread disinformation. Like, I think this book honors journalism and press and the Fourth Estate in a way that is, as it turns out, in my lens of 2022, is not exactly realistic, right? I think not to say that there are not journalists and reporters working right now that are working very earnestly to get the truth out there, as difficult as it is, but are working very hard to do that, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a whole lot of people out there who would just willingly get in front of a camera and spout total bullshit if someone told them to do it. And I don't think I think that's the part of this story that I think King could not predict. I think the idea generally that people would be shown the truth and shown a lie and still believe the lie was something he doesn't really get into in this. And I think it's because he didn't believe it. I think earnestly the King that wrote this story believed that if you got the truth out there, people would just believe in it. Mm-hmm. And we kind of saw in these last couple of years that that's not really the case.
Yeah, right. I basically agree with all that. I think the fact of the matter is you don't know what the truth is. This is what we all kind of collectively experienced was, unfortunately, a lot of the mouthpieces of the normal institutions of power demonstrated themselves not to be trustworthy. But it's not like we instantly knew, like, aha, therefore this other story over here must be the truth. It's like, okay, now I just don't know. Like now there's like 6 different theories for where it came from, where it's going, what's going to happen. I mean, I think a lot of stuff has been memory hold, where like toward the beginning of the pandemic, there were all kinds of numbers floating around about like how deadly it was.
Yeah, I remember that.
And how much it spread. And it was the Wild West, man. And like, no matter what point you wanted to make, you could find numbers to support your argument. Basically, I'm just reiterating what you said, that I still don't know, the fact of the matter about a lot of stuff that actually happened. Yeah. And our situation is really a lot less dire than what happened in the story. So yeah, long story short, the best way to control spread of information is to just put out a lot of bad information, and nobody will have any idea what the true information is.
Yeah. So that's kind of the thing that I didn't see this chapter do. And again, I really just think it's because I don't think King believed that would be successful. And I think we've seen over the years since this book was written that it would be very, very successful.
Yep.
And so that's the piece of this chapter that's missing for me. But the rest of it, I think, is just remarkably effective. I really do. I love the image of these people, standing up to the government and the horror of them just mindlessly mowing them down. But one of the things that really stood out to me as well is just how often King reinforces in this chapter the ways in which people turn against each other. And I think more specifically, the ways in which the military turns against each other, the ways in which we see the military's like hold on everything completely collapse when they just start turning their guns on each other and killing each other. Soldiers turning on soldiers, orders not being obeyed. Like someone will do a horrible thing and the soldier next to him will just turn his gun on him and shoot him. That's something that the text really, really emphasizes.
And, I think this is one of those other things that really says that this is a book written from the sensibility of the 70s, but released in the early 90s because the massacres committed by the U.S. military in like that time frame were shocking to everyone, just profoundly shocking. Because we had thought of our military as our gunslingers. They were our boys, and it was kind of everyone was reeling from it. They didn't know how to process it yet. There wasn't like this the sort of modern cynicism that there is. It was just horrible. There's certain specific massacres that were just incredibly horrifying to learn about, and I was reminded of those by the way that the soldiers are behaving here, where it's like they're pushed past their breaking point, and then they just kind of become animalistic and wantonly violent, and unhinged.
Yeah, it's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying. I really love this chapter though. I love that we end on the president like clearly sick himself, appearing on camera, reassuring everyone that the vaccine will be out in a week and everything's fine. And we cut from that little piece of bullshit to a writing on the side of a building that just says, "Dear Jesus, I will see you soon. Your friend America. P.S. I hope you will still have some vacancies by the end of the week." It's just remarkably affecting. Little beat to land this chapter on.
Yeah. I did find it very slightly amusing that in this story, King does the thing where it's like, it's just the president. It's not any particular president.
Yeah. Well, it makes it, I think like we talked about in the first bit, I think it makes it timeless in some ways, right? Like, I think King would normally just list who was president at the time of his writing, and then in his updated version, he'd have to change that because, King likes to be specific in his pop culture references. He likes to be specific. Like all the new King stories talk about Trump a lot, right? All the older King stories talk about Reagan a lot. There's a lot of Bush and Clinton in the 90s stories as well. This is something he normally does, but I think this allows this story to be timeless. And I think that's what he really wants.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a departure from his usual style. So, and I think it works.
Yep. All right, let's move on to chapter 27 with Larry. Finally, Matt, we're going to get to the chapter that makes Larry look good. Just kidding. So we meet Larry sitting alone on a bench in Central Park, and I think this is a really great way to kind of very quickly illustrate just how bad things have gotten in New York, and for Larry since we've last seen him. Like, he's sitting here in Central Park, and the first thing we see him do is observe dead zoo animals. From where Larry sat, he could see a lion, an antelope, and a zebra, and some sort of monkey. All but the monkey were dead. They had not died of the flu, Larry judged. They had gotten no food or water for God knows how long, and that had killed them.
So, stupid question, but is it like a super cool zoo there where you can see all these animals from one spot?
No. So the Central Park Zoo, I got the opinion that the animals had like been released from the zoo.
Oh, I see.
And just died. I didn't think he was actually literally in the zoo, but perhaps. I have not been to the Central Park Zoo in a while, but no, I do not think there's like a very convenient spot where you can see into 4 pens at the same time.
Yeah, I don't really care. I was just like, I was just like, where is he? How is he seeing this? And maybe you're right. Yeah, maybe they were out of their cages.
Mm-hmm. So we see Larry sitting here completely unsure of what he's supposed to do now. And we see that there are some other people in the park. Larry had spoken to a few of them. They were all pretty much the same, and Larry supposed that he himself wasn't much different. They were dazed, their speech disjointed, and they seemed helpless to stop reaching for your sleeve with their hands as they talked. They had stories to tell. All the stories were the same. I find that really just powerful writing there.
Yeah.
Like the desperation of people. Like, as you were talking about earlier, like that we get to live in this particular time where things haven't completely fallen apart yet, but they're basically there. And so the remaining people are just like, aren't even to the point where, okay, how do we survive? They're just at the what everyone I know is dead. What do I do now? It's a really, like, I think you're absolutely right that it's not a place that a lot of these stories stay in for very long. And I love that we get to live here for a whole chapter with Larry.
Yeah. I love that paragraph though. Just the detail of always reaching for your sleeve.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Love it.
So one of these people we see is the monster shouter, just a guy shouting about how the monsters are coming. And the other is a man just casually munching on Fritos, saying he's going to go jerk off in Yankee Stadium. He's always wanted to do that.
I love that it's his lifelong dream to jerk off in Yankee Stadium. It's not just like a spontaneous mental break. It's like, oh, I've been waiting for this finally.
Yeah, clearly this was just Stephen King's lifelong dream, and he's just
some of these things in his stories, I do wonder if he just makes them up out of whole cloth, or if there was like some guy who he knew who he worked at the laundromat with, and the guy's like, someday, Steve, I'm gonna sneak into Yankee Stadium, jack off on home plate.
That'll show those damn Yankees. Yeah. No, I could see that totally. But I mean, I think that's King's writing, though, is it always feels like some of these random characters could just be people that, like, random blue collar people that you mixed around with when you were younger,
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's what it feels like to me. Yeah.
So from here, Larry starts being very introspective and thinking back about his past. And so we go to see another Larry story. This one is once again how he was a big shithead. So we learned that Larry had a friend named Rudy. They both came to LA together, and that Larry had taken out a $25 loan from Rudy after losing a poker game. When Rudy asks for his money back, Larry says he already paid him back, which he didn't. He didn't, and he lied about that. And on some level, he kind of convinced himself for a while that he didn't lie about that, but thinking back on it now, he knows he absolutely totally did. So does this unlock more of Larry from you, or is this just like consistent with the Larry Underwood you've seen?
I mean, I think it fleshes out the picture a bit. It's like he's selfish and he's self-serving, but not like monstrously so, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think we can all relate to sort of maybe believing something because it was convenient to believe that we had done that, or that we had said that, or that we had not done the bad thing, and then maybe only later after an argument or whatever did we think, like, did I actually forget to and I think that's a pretty common human experience. And but like for Larry, it was an important thing, right? And he basically blew up like a real genuine friendship over it. And for his friend, it's evident that this wasn't like the first time he'd done this. This was a pattern of behavior with him. And so that's the thing that fleshes out the picture, is that he's just kind of like this consistently.
Yeah. I think his friend says something to the effect of like, I can't take any more Larry Underwood bullshit. Which is like, he definitely experiences this from Larry a lot. I really love the detail that he has the money on him. It's like, it's not even that he can't repay it. Like that he doesn't, like he has $30 sitting in his wallet and he just refuses to. Because I love the admission in his head that his mind knew he had $30 in his wallet, subtracted 25 from that automatically and said, oh, there's only 5 left. And because that's only $5 left, I must have already paid him already. Like this kind of subconscious selfishness that he equips himself with.
Right. Well, it's almost nonsense. Like it's the sort of nonsense you can imagine yourself thinking if you were not concentrating, or if it were really inconvenient for you to come up with that answer,
So from here, Larry goes into another story, this one about one of his big relationships while he was out in LA, a woman named Yvonne. They moved in together, and Larry is kind of remembering here how much he loved this relationship, Matt, and how how great it worked for him, except for the last couple of weeks where she turned out to be a real bitch. She says, we never actually learned what she did. I'm sure it was nothing. But the important part here is that in this relationship, this woman did everything for him. The thing he remembers specifically is he comes home from a hard day of work. She's got dinner on the table for him already, and as soon as they finish dinner, he gets to go sit in the living room and watch the World Series on TV. And that's the happiest time in his life, where he doesn't have to do anything, and she's taking complete care of him. It's just like, Larry.
Right. The key thing being that she became his mom, right?
Yeah. Basically.
Like she took care of him, and he took it totally for granted, because that's how you treat your mom. You know, yeah. When you're a kid, at least you take your mom for granted, but like, he felt like that's how it should be.
Yeah.
The food should be on the table.
Yeah. And look, maybe Yvonne loved baseball. I don't know. The text doesn't specifically say, but didn't you kind of get the feeling that they were watching baseball because Larry wanted to watch baseball, and that he probably didn't ask her, if you want to spend every night this week watching the World Series for 4 hours?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it even occurred to him to wonder what she would want to watch.
No. But the relationship failed because she turned out to be a real jerk.
Yeah.
She probably like asked him to do things.
Yeah. Right. I mean, totally. Either that, or after 3 weeks of watching baseball every night, she was like, "Can we watch like something else?" And then he was petulant about it, and she was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" And then it was like, "Why are you being this way?" You know. So
my God, I could totally see him doing exactly that. Yeah.
Right.
So after this trip down memory lane, Larry finally reveals that his mother had died 3 days ago, and like we talked about earlier, Larry just abandons her. We see sooner or later his mother would just be carried away like a sack of oats, and he didn't want to watch that. Her purse was under the cot. He found a pen and a bobby pin and her checkbook. He tore a deposit slip from the back of her book and wrote on her name, her address, and after a moment's calculation, her age. He clipped it onto her blouse pocket with the bobby pin and began to cry. He kissed her cheek and fled, crying. He felt like a deserter. That's because you are, Larry.
Well, at least he has the grace to feel bad about it.
Yeah, I guess that's counts for something.
Well, you know what's funny is I don't know what I would do in this situation, but especially since it's being contrasted to all these other characters who are not doing what he did, you definitely feel like he failed.
Yeah, I'm not saying the correct thing to do was to just sit with the corpse of your mother while no one comes to dispose of her, because the whole world is ending and they can't do that. Right. But I think it is specifically contrasted with all these people that work really, really hard to dispose of the body of the people they care about, to do something to honor that person as like their last final act for them. And what Larry does is he writes a note and pins it to her shirt and then leaves her. I also love the detail of, after a moment's calculation, her age. Do you know your parents' age off the top of your head? I don't think I would. I don't think I need to calculate to know my parents' age.
You know, I don't. Okay, so I thought I did, and then it was revealed that I was wrong. So, but this is because they visited recently, and I was like, I just was like totally confused because I thought I had it down pat. But anyway, yeah, I mean, my kids know my age, which is interesting because it's not like I like walk around telling them all the time. They just like keep track. Yeah, which is funny to me.
I feel like I always knew my parents' age. I don't know. I feel like that was never something that, like, there might have been at certain times in my life where it would have taken a little bit longer to recall it. But like, I just this moment was like, when I asked you that question, I was just like, oh, and then I checked myself and it was like, yeah, that's right.
I think what it is with my parents is they never said what age they were turning on birthdays unless asked. And because I was a selfish goblin, I never asked.
Sure.
And so I just never really kept track that well.
Yeah. So yeah, Larry abandons his mother, and now returns to this bench, and we see here, and now he could sit on this bench and grieve for more general things. His mother's loss of her retirement, the loss of his own career, for the time in LA where he had sat watching the World Series with Yvonne, knowing there would be bed and love later, and for Rudy. I'm not trying. I feel like I'm being very mean to Larry, and I think part of that is because I've never felt as hostile towards what Larry's doing than in this reread. When you like really think about it and read it close, Larry comes off as much worse in my head than he ever did on previous rereads. So I'm being a little bit more harsh on the man than right now. But like, oh, I'm so sorry for your career, bud. Oh no, you don't get to be a famous singer anymore. The world is dead.
Uh-huh. No,
Which I acknowledge this isn't fair of me, because yes, like absolutely sitting there pondering what your life is going to be now as the world collapses, one of the things you're going to be thinking about is, oh, like all my hopes and dreams for what I wanted my life to be are over now. Like I think that's a very normal thing to think about.
Yeah.
But I'm very predisposed right now to be like pissed off at Larry. So that was my initial reaction to reading that.
Sure, and I think we might like revisit this when we get to Frannie, but I have this feeling that, you know, King thought long and hard about a lot of different possible reactions to an all-encompassing disaster like this.
Yeah.
And then he kind of had all of his different characters embody different reactions. And I do think Larry's reaction here is a very human, you know, normal, flawed human reaction that anybody could understandably have if they felt like they finally just got their lucky break. And then the world ends now. It's like, God, why are you doing this to me specifically?
Yeah.
Even at the time you have the thought, you might realize how ridiculous it is, which Larry kind of does somewhat. But yeah, no, I mean, I think we're being invited to be critical of Larry. I think the text is highlighting this for us.
Yeah, I think so too. So Larry, finishing that trip down memory lane, finally gets up and starts wandering around. While he is doing this, he bumps into Rita Blakemore, another immune survivor like him, hanging out in Central Park like him. We see that Rita is a woman in her 50s, old enough to be his mother, and is clearly well off, a socialite. Her husband was an investment banker. We see she's popping pills like they're candy here. And Rita she's an interesting character, Matt. She's clearly very shell-shocked and spacey right now, but also she talks and reasons things in a very unique way. And so I'm curious, what are your initial thoughts about Rita here?
It's kind of hard to pin down exactly what way she's going to go. Because, you know, this could be a front, right? It could be kind of a facade covering for completely falling apart. So like, instead of answering your question directly, I'll remark that, I do think, you know, even the side characters like Rita are his mouthpieces for like different ways of reacting to a disaster. Not just our main characters, but also Rita and the dude that we're going to meet in the next chapter with Frannie. So like, I think Rita was a person who's very comfortable in her groove, and she had a very healthy amount of, you know, self-awareness about herself and her place in the world. And now she understands that the world she knew is dead. Her comfortable place in it is gone. This is all sort of akin to destroying her identity. I don't think she's going to last long in this new world where she has no place and her identity has no future. That'd be my prediction.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll find out as we hang out with Rita more. But first, I just wanted to read this quote because I just found it delightful. She's talking about her dead husband, who actually did not die from Captain Trips. He died of a stroke a few years before this. And it says here, he died with his tie on. Do you think that could be our generation's equivalent of the old saying about dying with your boots on? Harry Blakemore died with his tie on. I like it, Larry. I find that delightful. I think that's also a really great window into her reasoning of things, like how she views the world, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So after hitting it off, Rita and Larry decide to go grab some food together. And I just want to read this part just in case you're listening to me constantly compare Rita to Larry's mother. And you're saying, Scott, you're stretching a little bit here. I'm going to read this paragraph right here. As he linked his through it, he caught a whiff of her sachet, a smell that was at once comforting and disquietingly adult in its associations for him. Almost old. His mother had worn sachet on their many trips to the movies together. So there's a replacement mom. He's got a replacement mom. And this one he can bang.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't even really thought about this fact that when I made the earlier comparison to the other Yvonne girlfriend that he treated like a mom, that he's just always looking for a mom who'll take care of him and and he can be a kid. Like this is really interesting. Like commentary on, I don't know, some kind of masculinity or something, where it's like he really just wants to be a kid. And what he needs to do, wants versus needs, right?
Yeah.
He wants to be a kid and to be taken care of by a woman. What he needs is to stand. He needs to have some spine. He needs to be the one who takes care. And yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable for him, and it's sort of against his nature in certain ways. Although he does have that steel. I don't know. It's going to be, I feel like this is going to be a really fun character to watch evolve.
Yeah, I totally agree. We will find out more about Rita and Larry in the future weeks. But for now, we move on to our final chapter of the week, chapter 28. It's a Frannie chapter. And before we get into Frannie's chapter, which is excellent, I just want to say I take a really simple, delightful pleasure in the way King does scene transitions sometimes, because you have this moment at the very end of Larry's chapter where it says, they went into a steakhouse and Larry cooked a trifle clumsily, but she applauded each course: the steak, the French fries, the instant coffee, the strawberry rhubarb pie. And then we cut to chapter 28, which is Frannie chapter, which says, there was a strawberry pie in the fridge. It was covered with saran wrap. And so obviously we've done just a beat linking comparison here between these two characters in these two chapters.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I wondered for a second if like I'd missed something in the audiobook because I was so confused. But I think it's perfect though. And again, I think this emphasizes how Frannie and Larry specifically are being linked. They're being mirrored. They're being compared and contrasted. In the first part of the story, we observe them both deal with a big life disruption and flee that disruption to their parents. Frannie had a pregnancy. Larry had loan sharks or whatever after him. Mm-hmm. They fled home to the parents, and then we watched them have conflicts with their parents. They went different ways, but the point was to parallel those two things. Now we're going to watch both of them deal with the death of those parents, and they deal with it very, very differently, actually.
Yeah.
And so here, I think the contrast is being drawn. I was thinking about whether, like, am I being simplistic by saying it's just Frannie and Larry that are being linked? And I think that is the case. Like, yeah, you could sort of include Nick in this because the sheriff and his wife did sort of become surrogate parents to Nick for like 5 minutes. But I don't know. I don't really see it as being as direct a parallel. Seems a bit more tenuous to me.
I think I think it's kind of there. You're right, but I do think that the Frannie and Larry is so much more textually explicit comparison. I mean, especially when we do these chapter transitions like this, and I mean the beats that echo each other in each of these chapters are so apparent to me that this is definitely what we're doing for sure.
And it makes me really feel like we're building toward their meeting because, I mean, I don't actually know. This is one of the things I don't actually know for sure. I don't actually know that the characters are all going to meet, but I suspect strongly that they will.
Sure.
And so I feel like we're building toward a meeting between these two characters specifically.
Cool. So we see here that Frannie is a little lost and dazed herself. And the first part of this chapter kind of shows us kind of follow her thought process as she tries to retrace her train of thought that led her here to staring at a strawberry pie in the refrigerator, deciding if she wanted to eat it or not. And I love the kind of everyone's kind of lost and spacey and not exactly with it in this week's reading because they're going through these horrible things. But I really love this. I really love Frannie specifically. I love, again, we talked about this in her very first chapter, but I love the ways in which the text reflects how her thought processes work. And they were kind of, at the beginning, like it felt like she thought very fast and changed, not viewpoints, but like changed topics in her mind very quickly. And I think in here we see that same thing, but like escalated and more unhinged a little bit and a little bit more rambling, I think. So let me just read this and we can talk about that a little more. What? A line of scripture, a paraphrase, occurred to her for no good reason. Before removing the mote in thy neighbor's eye, attend to the beam in thy own. She considered it. Mote? Beam? That particular image had always bothered her. What sort of beam? Moonbeam? Roof beam? There were always flashlight beams and beaming faces, and there had been a New York mayor named Abe Beam, not to mention a song she had learned in Vacation Bible School, I'll be a sunbeam for him. before removing the mote in thy neighbor's eye. So it's just kind of all over the place, right? And it's talking about a quote from Matthew 7:5 in the Bible, talking about basically what she says, removing the beam in thine own eye before removing the mote in someone else's. But it's very rambly and all over the place.
Yeah, it's rambly and discursive, and it actually made it kind of hard for me to pay attention. Not even like as a criticism or like negative, but like my brain started doing what Franny's brain was doing, and I would like follow along tangents instead of paying attention and staying on task. And then I'd have to like rewind and listen again. But like it was interesting how I was getting caught up in her scatterbrained, shell shocked zone.
Yeah, that's great, because I think that's what King was going for here. I think he wants you to kind of feel that, and so the fact that worked on you, I think, is really great.
Yeah, it was cool.
So we do learn, of course, that both of Franny's parents are dead. Her mother died at the hospital that she was being taken to when we last saw Franny in last week's chapter. Her father died at home upstairs in his bed. And I like with Larry, we kind of get filled in on what happened in town for the last few days. And I think this is an interesting thing that we didn't talk about, and I think it makes sense to talk about it here. We left both Larry and Franny in these pivotal moments for them, both, rushing to the hospital for their sick parent, right? Larry's mother was sick and dying, and he's trying to get her to the hospital, and he can't. And then Franny gets a call from her father saying she's at the hospital, she's not doing well, I'm going to come pick you up and we're going to go. That's where we left these characters, and we come back to them days later after the what we knew was going to happen has happened. So it's like we skipped over this very pivotal moment and then are having to kind of fill in what happened after that. It's an interesting choice.
Yeah, it's another thing I guess I'm forced to compare to Larry is like Larry still did this thing where he kind of caught us up to different things out of order, but his wasn't as like lost in this dissociative fog.
Sure.
That Franny is in.
Yeah. She's kind of, it does feel, and I think that's one of the really interesting things, because we do get this part of the book where we learn that there was this big town meeting in the Algonquin town hall where folks decide to completely close the town off to outsiders, like to the point where they're like posting guards at the town entrances and like shooting anyone that comes in, which like feels weird, right? And I think that it goes into Franny's state of mind as she's recalling these things. Like it feels like we got there already. We got to the point where we're like holing up in our own town and shooting outsiders to death already. We're like there. It just feels very sudden. And it feels like we've escalated to, end of the world survival times very, very, very quickly. Also to the point where they're like deciding if they want to throw all the summer people out of the town as well, but are eventually overruled on that vote. I don't know. There's something kind of like, whoa, about that whole part.
Yeah. I mean, I think once again, the angle of fear and mob psychology is being highlighted. And the other thing, as you sort of point out there, like it doesn't make sense because the disease is already clearly present in the town. So like, what's the fucking point of closing down the roads at this point?
Yeah. Nothing.
You could wave your hands and say like, well, we want to be able to protect our community after society breaks down, but I don't even think there is a rational case. I think it's panic, and people have just watched their parents and friends and children die, and they're just like, we have to do something, and this is something, and so we have to do it. My favorite syllogism. Like it's kind of meant. I think it's meant to be like, and yeah, I love what it says specifically about Franny, like not being sure if that was a dream or not. Yeah. Because of how her mind is already so dissociated that she's can't believe that really happened.
And how insane it sounds. Like, it goes to the question of like, how afraid do you have to make a person before he's willing to kill another human being? And I think what this part of the story postulates is not very, like, you just gotta like just elevate their fear to a slight level, and then we're just like, I'm just gonna shoot people now. I'm just gonna murder people now, because like it's a pretty damning statement on humanity in a lot of ways, I think.
Totally. Yeah.
But of course, we see that that Peter Goldsmith was against it completely because he's awesome.
Yep, we love him.
I wonder if Stephen King had like I guess Peter Straub was his close friend. Like he really likes Peters. Like it's like the anti-Susan, where Peters and his stories are all great people. Now they don't always survive, but they're all really good people.
No, you're right. You're right. They're often tragic, but always honorable.
Yeah. So Franny is sitting there in front of her pie and finally realizes something else her brain was trying to associate together. She's got a corpse of her father upstairs, and it's a warm Maine day, and someone's gonna have to bury this thing, and there's no one else to do it, so it must be her. So we cut from there over to Franny in the middle of her father's garden, digging his father's grave, and into the scene enters our newest character, Harold Lauder. Yay. Yay, it's Harold.
Finally, Harold.
I've been waiting for this moment for a while, actually.
Okay.
Because Harold Lauder is a very specific character. I love this introduction too. It's so good. The car was a brand new Cadillac Coupe de Ville, bottle green, and stepping out of it was a fat 16-year-old Harold Lauder. Franny felt an instant surge of distaste. She didn't like Harold and didn't know anyone who did, including his late sister Amy. Probably his mother had, but it struck Fran with a tired sort of irony that the only person left in Algonquin besides her should be one of the very few people in town she honestly didn't like. So obviously the text primes us to dislike Harold from the get, right? Like we specifically are told our character Franny, who I think we've fallen in love with over the course of the last few chapters, doesn't like this guy. And then the text does just a pretty good job of that on its own. Like the way he ogles her, the way he talks, like the way he says petrol and my child. These things are so annoying. They don't have a word in 1978 for what Harold is really, besides, they got the nerd, the dork, the nice guy. But I think we've got a pretty good word for it, Matt. Harold's an incel. That's what Harold is.
Yeah, I mean, I think like nerd and dork doesn't really cover it because he's sort of ostentatiously gross and repulsive. It's interesting though. Like it's a very interesting approach that King is taking here because I felt pity for him, and I think that we're meant to feel pity for him. Because like he's super gross, he's super repellent, repugnant, etc. But like, I think there are a few lines in here where our sense of pity for like gross fuck ups who are just not being helped by anyone is invoked. Like King does go hard on Harold, but I think also, when Franny wonders whether anybody ever told him that soap might help with his severe acne problem. Knowing humans, I'm pretty sure the answer is no. Nobody ever did tell him because nobody ever tells young men anything. They just kind of let them sink or swim. And then if they sink, they're like, what a loser. And I don't know, like definitely I'm also right here with you kind of laughing at this ridiculous, gross character that King has painted. But also like, I do think King is a little bit prompting us to have a little bit of pity.
No, I know what you mean. I mean, there's definitely moments like I find this a really interesting turn of events where, she goes into the house, he kind of follows her and they're talking and it says she could have gotten a sweater from the kitchen closet, but of course he would have known why and she didn't want to embarrass him again. Harold was trying hard to be a good guy, something which must have been a little like speaking a foreign language. So like it doesn't even say, oh, he's ogling her again. Mm-hmm. It just implies that by her desire to go get a sweater. But then, she does have pity on him. She does have sympathy with him. So I think you're right here generally that Harold is seen as a character we don't like. He's kind of comes off as annoying. The way he talks, the way he babies her in some ways is really weird considering she's older than him. But I think there is on some level some sympathy and there is, maybe some level of hope that this experience for him could be what he needs to stop being a creepy little troll child, and become something new and something better. But right now we just don't know.
Yeah, maybe, right? Like, I think one idea you brought up earlier is like, for some people, this is just a terrible tragedy that takes everything away from them. But for some other characters in this story, it might sort of, it's horrible to say it, but be exactly what they need to get out of their rut.
Right. And I think there's also another side of this where you can say, you know, one of the things Harold says in this chapter is that nobody in this town liked me. I am persona non grata here. Nobody really liked me. I didn't get along with anyone. And so maybe this to Harold is an opportunity as well, an opportunity to all the people that hated him have been disposed of now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's too early to tell on Harold. And I think that's very deliberate.
Yep. It is interesting to see how, you know, Larry and Frannie have now each met, you know, the one single other living person near them, and we've seen how they react to it. They've reacted. You know, it's been very different situations for each of them. Yeah,
and it's interesting. I think this is really interesting. I was thinking about this, and I haven't quite come to a conclusion on what exactly we're doing here. But they're in back-to-back chapters in which they have both lost their parent, and then they meet someone almost immediately after their parent had died. Rita is clearly supposed to be linked or compared or contrasted with Larry's mother. The book has made that textual. It's there. Harold definitely isn't Peter Goldsmith, right? First of all, he's a 16-year-old boy. But he does call her my child several times in this chapter, right? That's something he continues to say to her, despite the fact that Frannie is clearly annoyed with it. And so are we trying to do not that he's supposed to be replacement Peter or anything, but it is interesting that we through that we then start looking at him through not necessarily a parental aspect, but reframing her as a child in the relationship, just like the Larry and his mother frame was, oh, he's a child. I don't know. It's really interesting choice there that I think links perfectly with Larry once again.
Well, so yeah, like he noticed her perfume, and that made him feel a bit uncomfortable, and now he's calling her child, and that makes her feel like not just uncomfortable but angry. So like there's definitely some playing. I don't know if I can quite nail down all of the intended parallels here, but I assume we'll see these characters again, and maybe that will continue as a motif. Pay attention to that.
Yeah, definitely. So Frannie is kind of convinced. They're having a conversation here, and Frannie is kind of convinced this will all blow over and the authority will eventually come back for them. But Harold, who proves that a busted clock is right twice a day, has correctly guessed the full nature of Captain Trips. I think this very much fits into the incel depiction of Harold, that he immediately goes to the biggest conspiracy theory possible, which just so happens in this case to be 100% right, which is an interesting choice.
It is really, this seems like classic King somehow, to give the one guy who he's just gone to great pains to make you loathe turn out to be the one who's actually dead on correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. I think you're right. So before he leaves, Harold says that he's going to be leaving town, getting out of Algonquin, and that Frannie should come with him. She, at the moment at least, declines, saying, you know, she's got to bury her father and she just has to figure out what the hell she's going to do next. But we've kind of got that open invitation there for us, so maybe she'll take him up on that.
Yeah, we'll see.
Then, Matt, we are subject to the arduous, heartbreaking moment of Frannie Goldsmith burying her father. And King spends a long time on this, right? He has Frannie, walk up, kind of sew his burial shroud over him, or change his clothes, then show us the effort that it takes to get him all the way down the stairs into the garden and then buried. He spends a long time on this. He really wants us to feel the effort and the heartbreak of Frannie doing this thing that, as you said, in a world where the world is over, is not necessarily a requirement anymore, and yet she does it anyway.
Right. I mean, she hasn't even started thinking of this as a survival situation.
Yeah.
But I think because we're reading a book and we know kind of what genre we're in, we're able to jump ahead of her. True. And so, which we, and I think that's one interesting thing about the way the story goes is like, these people don't know they're in a horror novel. So
yeah, fair.
So it's you're getting the human reactions, right? You're not getting the tropey paint by numbers version of the story and I think it makes it much more interesting this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's so in a daze that I don't think her I need to get the body out of the house and do something with it thing is because I'm gonna live in this house going forward. Like, I don't even think she's reached that phase of thinking about, like, you know, continuing to live, and like she just isn't there yet. It's just, this is a problem, I have to solve the problem, and I'm going to bury my father in a place where it would have made him happy, and I'm the only one that is going to be able to do it, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah makes sense. So
we end our chapter with Frannie Goldsmith also having a dream. We hadn't seen her. I think it was both Nick and Larry, or was it Nick and Stu, right? It was Nick and Stu had dreams, right? Of the cornfields. I think that's true. I don't think we've seen Larry had a dream.
No, I think you're right.
So Frannie has a dream as well. This one is not a cornfield, but it is a nightmare with her father, and with actually in her father's room with a horrible no-faced man who hands her a twisted coat hanger for her baby. She calls this man the Walking Dude, who we know as Randall Flagg. And that's kind of how our chapter ends. So any thoughts on this twisted coat hanger for the baby moment that ends the chapter?
Well, I mean, the idea that we have a baby in the oven in a situation where the world has ended, it's like that's like the promise of the future of renewal of something beyond this. Maybe not the imminent death of the entire world, but then it makes sense that Randall Flagg would want to destroy that, because you could view his vision as being like to actually fully end the world, like that seems like something he might enjoy being responsible for. So I don't know, definitely some interaction along those lines.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on. So
cool.
That's great. We'll have to keep paying attention to that Frannie baby. And why the Walking Dude would be so interested in getting her to get rid of it.
It's Jesus.
Sure, Matt. It's Jesus. And that's going to do it. We ended on Jesus, as we always do.
Mm-hmm.
Praise him.
Right.
All right. So that is it for our reading for this week. Next week, we will continue on with more Stand. We are going to be reading chapters 29 through 35, moving our way through book 1. I don't even remember specifically what happens next week, Matt, but I can promise you it's going to be really good.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah. All right, let's move into our discussion question. Our discussion question from last week was, what is your favorite complicated family? And just a reminder for folks, we are now officially only pulling a handful of these discussion questions because we're just getting way too many responses these days. So if you see yours on here, it doesn't mean we didn't like it. Matt developed an algorithm that is randomly pulling them. And so it has nothing to do with the quality of your answer. Just like we always do when we don't get enough downloads on our episode, blame the algorithm.
That's right. It's always nothing. I mean, that's the great thing about the modern age, is nothing is anyone's fault. It's just the algorithm.
That's true.
Yep.
All right. What did the algorithm pick for us for our answers this week?
Yep. So favorite complicated family, and the answers from Wordlessly Gwen. We have definitely the Hargreaves family from Umbrella Academy. The adult children suffered a horrible and toxic childhood raised by a manipulative father. Despite doing truly awful things to each other, the siblings somehow find a way to work together and save the day, or not. Working through their shared and individual trauma as a family is interesting to watch because all of their coping skills are not always healthy. Drinking, drugs, denial, dancing. But still, they still try to function as a cohesive team.
Ah, yes, the 4Ds.
Yes, exactly.
Have you watched Umbrella Academy at all?
I think I watched the first 1 or 2. How many seasons are there?
There have been 3.
Maybe I've watched the first 2 seasons.
Season 2, they go back to the 60s.
No, I haven't watched. Texas. I watched the first season. Just watched the first season.
Yeah. I've watched them all. I just finished the 3rd season this past weekend, actually, and I liked it a lot. I liked the first season a whole lot. I didn't much care for the 2nd season very much, and so I was really hesitant to jump into the 3rd. But I enjoyed my time with it. It's a fun show. It's not my favorite show ever, but it's a fun show.
Yeah, I liked the first season a lot. There was a lot of cool stuff in there.
Yeah. Next, we have Emperor Fry the Solid, who says, best complicated family might be the Addams family. They're spooky but caring, trying to murder each other, yet full of an almost innocent glee. In the creator's original notion, Gomez and Morticia never married, but choose each other over and over again in a very relationship anarchy kind of way. In the late shows, they're married, but Gomez is the one to change his name to join her spooky family. For a family written in the 60s, very rich and complex. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either. That's a little bit more serious than I assumed the Addams family backstory was.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, I mean, I remember being a kid and really enjoying the just
the live action movies.
The live action movies. The Christopher Lloyd.
Yeah, that's exactly what Christopher Lloyd is Fester. Yeah. Like how much of I think that's my entire view of the Addams family, honestly, is those two movies. Yeah. I know there was a cartoon and we were kids, but I didn't really watch that.
No, me neither. No, I love it. Love that answer. I love Wednesday is great. And the little hand. What's it called? Thing or Cousin It? Or those are two different things.
I think Cousin It is the hairy one. I think Thing is the hand.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's great. All right. Luke V says, while I was initially inclined to choose one from the plethora of fucked up families in Westeros or Essos in A Song of Ice and Fire, I ended up choosing The Endless from Neil Gaiman's The Sandman graphic novels. While the 7 siblings known as the Endless are the anthropological personifications of powerful natural forces / phenomena, whose names all begin with D. Again, we have the 4 Ds. What they they are still exactly that: siblings. Destiny, death, dream, destruction, desire, despair, and delirium share many of the same common traits adult human siblings do. They bicker with each other. They resent each other. They always push away from each other when they are so inclined, yet also go out of their way to help each other when they are feeling more tenderhearted. While I only have one sibling myself, my brother, with whom I am extremely close, it is nice to know that even the embodiments of the human experience are not exempt from the trials of having brothers and sisters. Yes.
This is great because my mom sent me a random text message today that was like, "Are you mad at your sisters?" And I was like, "What? No? Should I be?" Having siblings is great.
That's funny. Yeah, I like this answer because it's not like a family that is a total disaster. It's just complicated, right? And complicated is fun. And that was the question. So
gosh, I have not read the Sandman graphic novels. I think I've read the first issue and that's it. But I think there's a Netflix show coming out soon that I'm interested in checking out.
For sure, yeah.
Next, we have Rachel Brown, who says, my favorite complicated family is the clones in Orphan Black, played by the brilliant Tatiana Maslany. An amazing description of the events of nurture, nature, and free will. They're genetically identical while being so completely different that you could always tell when ruthless soccer mom Allison is impersonating sweet science lesbian Cosima, or realizing that a clone walking in silhouette is the terrifying yet weirdly lovable Helena solely by her body posture. They have all very complicated and constantly shifting relationships with each other, and you care deeply about every single one. My wife, right when we first started dating, was really, really obsessed with that show, and I've never watched it myself except for like the random 3 episodes in the middle of a season that I watched with her, because when you first start dating someone, you just want to be around them and you don't care what you're doing. So I just randomly watched 3 episodes of a show I had not seen. So I know the general premise of this story, this show, and I enjoyed what I saw, but I've never really fully appreciated it because I haven't watched it from the beginning.
Scott, you're gonna think this is funny, but I thought Orphan Black was an anime.
It's not.
So
I get why you think so.
Okay.
Because that name sounds like an anime.
It kind of does,
but it's not.
Okay, well, it sounds really interesting. I obviously didn't know what it was because I had totally the wrong impression of what it was. So cool. Thanks for describing it.
So I started talking about how I watched it and you were like, wait, Scott, your wife watches anime?
No, I literally Googled it on another tab because I was so confused. And then I realized it wasn't anime.
Sweet.
All right. May Green says, most messed up family, how do you say this word? Dollenganger family from VC Andrew's Flowers in the Attic. So much trauma that was passed down through generations: death, debt, family betrayal, control, deception, rape, incest, murder, and imprisonment. The whole enchilada. I read this book when I was 13. I read it again as an adult and couldn't believe I had it in my possession at 13. It's so dark and twisted. And then they also add their most favorite, the Griffins from Family Guy. Talking drinking dog, mouthy gay baby, butt of every joke Meg, clueless Peter, and Lois just trying to hold it all together. Yep, it's great.
I remember when I loved Family Guy.
Don't forget Chris.
You forgot Chris.
But,
you're supposed to forget Meg, not Chris.
You know what's happening is YouTube, the algorithm. We're talking about the algorithm a lot today. Just started showing me like 30-second to 5-minute long Family Guy clips. And God. I guess because I clicked on them, it's like, oh, you love this. You love Family Guy and you love watching short Family Guy clips. And so my feed has a lot of that on it now.
For whatever reason, I was on YouTube and like a 30-second clip from the movie Moneyball came up. And I was like, I wonder what this clip's about. And so I made the mistake of watching the 30-second clip about Moneyball. And now YouTube is like, oh, you really love Moneyball. Let's talk about Moneyball a lot. And I don't want to talk about Moneyball.
Yeah. My YouTube now thinks I have an extremely short attention span because of that. So.
Of course, my YouTube is also getting really confused because I'm also listening to a lot of Coco Melon all of a sudden. And YouTube is like, wait, what? You want kid songs too? No?
My YouTube somehow knows when it's me and when it's not me. It's kind of interesting, actually.
Impossible.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like it does.
No, I think it probably does. All right. Next, we have Steve Living Room, who says, I couldn't think of a good Stephen King family, maybe because he loves to bring in different people together through his novels. My first thought was the family in Weeds. What a crazy, complicated ride they go through. Fantastic show, too. Next, I thought of Parenthood, both the movie and the series. They show us just how complicated family matters can become. But the winner for me would have to be This Is Us. The real-life complications and family tie-ins are the best written, most real-to-life stories in any visual medium I've ever seen. Better than any movie, series, or TV show. You're making me cry. Just think about that damn show.
I haven't seen This Is Us, but I will say that Parenthood, the movie, I watched. For some reason, my parents just loved that movie, and I'd watch it a whole bunch when I was like a pretty young kid. And a huge amount of the jokes I just didn't understand at all, because they were extremely mature and. I don't know. That book, that movie has a special place in my heart, though.
Great. I've seen Parenthood, the TV show. I've never seen the movie. Weirdly.
Oh, it's Steve Martin, so you can't go wrong, right?
Yeah, I need to watch it. You're right.
All right. Next from Quirky Beans, they say, well, I can imagine having 4 sets of parents to one child would be pretty complicated and probably lead to a person having an inflated sense of self-importance as an adult. Here I am again to mention the cool, amazing, and epic Expanse series, highlighting my main meddling man, Jim Holden. Perfect, yes. On future Earth, the population is getting out of control, skyrocketing. It's past the moon, past Mars. Humans are colonizing everything, but their overcrowded base of existence remains at full capacity. Space life is hard on the meat sack. Population moderation is a must in this world if society wants to manage its resources. DNA science has come a long way since our time in the sun, and now 8 adults can put all their genes into one pool if they want a child. Behold, Jim Holden is born. It must have been an unusual childhood. Can I have some ice cream, Mommy? Go ask your other mom. Mommy told me to ask you. Can I have some ice cream? I don't know. Why don't you ask your dad? Yeah, okay, it's kind of yeah. It's good. It keeps going. But yeah, no, it's that's a I never seriously actually considered what Jim Holden's childhood was like, but given how goddamn entitled he is, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Full Fathom 5 gives a couple different examples. We're going to go through some of these pretty fast. The more I think about this, the longer the list gets. 1, anything basic in Greek mythology, because let's face it, Zeus's exploits caused, well, everything. Number 2, the Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingslover. Southern Baptist family dragged to the Congo in the 60s by a damaged fundamentalist father. The 4 daughters each deal with events in very different ways. Ooh, yeah, that sounds rough. Educated by Tara Westover. It's a memoir, but still used by teachers of psychology to exemplify several disorders and destructive coping mechanisms. My wife read that book. She really liked it. Pride and Prejudice, because sometimes it's fun to read about other people's embarrassingly social foibles. 5, the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon. I can't read that name. Gabaldon. The Star series misses out on so many family twists and turns created by time travel. I watched the Star series with my wife because she was really into that.
Cool.
But I have not read the books.
I have to admit, I've read like none of these. I guess I know a lot of.
You haven't
Greek
read Pride and
mythology.
Prejudice? You gotta read.
No.
You gotta read Pride and Prejudice.
I've not read any of these. Cool. Good list though. I mean, it's funny because I'm like, these all sound very literary and like things that I would benefit as a human being from reading.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. By the way, Full Fathom 5 goes on from there, but we're only going to read a few of them for time. There's lots of great examples.
Yeah. Jaraxxus Eredar Lord says, I think my favorite dysfunctional family in media is the Crane family in Mike Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House, a collection of estranged siblings have to come together after a tragedy and confront the horrors that led to their various traumas. It's clear that some of them are looking to blame someone else in the family, while others do want fences mended to make something good out of the terrible events that the house has caused. Overall, just a car crash of a family. Yet most everyone has their moments. Cool.
This is when I remind you, Matt, that you need to watch that show.
Yes, it is on the list, Scott. I know. I love Mr. Flanagan.
So thank you, Jaraxxus, Eredar, Lord of the Burning Legion. It's a WoW reference, man.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. I didn't know that.
And thank you to everyone who sent those questions in. Even if we didn't read yours, we still read them all and quite enjoyed them all. So thank you so much. But we have a new question for you next week, Matt, and it has to do with our favorite little incel, Harold Lauder. We're going to be learning a lot more about Harold as the book goes. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that. But to preface that future conversations, we wanted to ask this question. And what question are we asking, Matt?
Who is your favorite Harold Lauder type character?
Yeah, so I think Harold Lauder is a very specific type in fiction, and I'm curious what your favorite version of this particular guy is. There's many of them out there.
Yeah, and maybe people have a different sense of what exactly King is doing with this character, so it'd be interesting to get an angle on that.
Yeah, definitely. So send those answers in. Can't wait to read them next week. But that is going to do it for us this week. Next week, as we said, The Stand continues with chapters 29 through 35 of the novel, 29 through 35. And once again, I will remind you, if you are ever curious what chapters we are doing on which weeks, you can check the spreadsheet linked in the show notes of this and every single episode to check that out. So you would know, for example, that while we are doing 29 through 35 this week, the week after that, we will be doing 36 through 42. And 2 weeks after that, we will be doing chapters 45 and 46 because those are apparently really, really long chapters. So we're only doing 2. You'd know all that because it's all in the spreadsheet, just like you'd know that we're going to finish The Stand on the 3rd of November.
Yep.
It's a magical spreadsheet. You should go check it out.
It's a very well made spreadsheet, everyone. He's very proud of it.
I'm very proud. Very proud of it. Yes.
That's right. Remember, you can reach us at email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com.
You can reach us at email.
You can reach us at email. It's late, folks. Or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit at r/toothmedia is a great place to answer the discussion question and chat with other listeners.
Yes, and as we say every week, make sure you are subscribed to this podcast. You probably are. You don't need to hear it. But in the off case you're new and we're like, wow, I really love this podcast. I guess I will just carry on with my day. Don't do it. First, click the subscribe button.
Yeah. That's how they get you, is they distract you from subscribing. So don't let them get you.
Who's they?
Well, they take many forms, Scott. They're behind those behind the faces of everyone who's ever smiled at you and with a smile that never touched their eyes. That is they.
Ah, I see. Do they have a smiley face button on their jacket?
They do.
Okay.
Yes. So,
guys, it's so late. You have no. We started late, and the show's going long. We are both so tired. We're finishing the show now. Let's do it, Matt.
Yeah. So if you like Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider heading on over to patreon.com/doofmedia. If you're listening to this point in the show, you're probably one of the sort of people who enjoys listening to us talk about stuff. Like, I feel safe in saying that. And that kind of implies that you would probably enjoy going over and checking the Patreon content where we talk about other Stephen King adaptations and stuff.
Yeah.
We have a lot of fun doing it. I think it's fun to listen to. This week we have a bunch of new patrons. I think because we started The Stand, we have a bunch of new listeners. So we have this week to welcome Stephen M., Manny M., Racecar 378, Daniel U., Len, and Kremplin. Welcome, everyone. So great to have you. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff we have over there.
Yeah, we hope our guide towards how to access that audio content worked out for you. But if not, just message us on Patreon and we can try to walk you through it as well.
Yep.
But of course, there's plenty of you out there that cannot afford to donate right now, and that's okay. You can help us out always in other ways that don't cost any money. You can share the podcast. We've been, being told by people that our podcast is being shared in Facebook groups and in subreddits and all these things. And it's great to hear. It really does help us. That kind of organic sharing of the podcast really helps us. We try to get the word out as much as we can, but we're only 2 people. So any help you can be for that would be wonderful. And of course, it always helps when you leave us a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Rolly524, who gives us 5 stars and says, "On the beam. I first read the Dark Tower series over 10 years ago, and it's always stuck with me. I have found these beloved stories all the more enjoyable following the path of the beam alongside Matt and Scott." Well, thank you so much, Rolly. Is it Rolly or Raleigh? I think it's Rolly, right? Rolly. Rolly. Rolly.
I would say Rolly, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Rolly, and thank you to everyone who has taken the time to do those ratings and reviews. We bumped over 400 reviews on Apple Podcasts, which, is still crazy to think about. That doesn't seem like a lot, I'm sure, for a lot of the big podcasts out there, but that's a lot for us, and we're very thrilled with it. It represents to have over 400 reviews and still be at 5 freaking stars, man. That's pretty great, and that's because of you guys. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that.
We really do appreciate y'all.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we are finally done for the week, so we'll see you right back here next week for more Stand. I am so excited. The book is it just keeps getting better and better and better and better. So we'll see you next week to talk all about it. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.